The history of ancient Greece begins on the shores of the Aegean, where scattered communities gradually formed the foundations of Western civilization. Long before the rise of powerful city-states, early settlers on the Greek mainland and surrounding islands built small agricultural societies. These communities would evolve into centers of trade, craftsmanship, and governance that defined the ancient world. Geography shaped everything. Mountain ranges divided the land into isolated valleys, forcing settlements to develop independently. The sea became the primary link between them, turning the Greeks into skilled sailors and traders. From Crete to the Peloponnese, they built networks that spread ideas, goods, and language across the eastern Mediterranean. The earliest major civilization in this region emerged on the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization. After the collapse of the late Bronze Age palatial systems, the period conventionally labeled the Greek Dark Ages begins around 1100 BC. The term Dark Ages describes a phase of reduced material complexity, lower population densities in many areas, and a marked retreat in long-distance exchange networks. It is not a cultural blank. Rather, it is a long, uneven contraction from the bureaucratic, palace-run world of the Mycenaeans to a regional, village-centered landscape. This segment traces the archaeological and material evidence that defines the era, notes the changes in social and economic organization, and follows the slow processes that set the stage for the later archaic revival. At the end of the Bronze Age, the Mycenaean palace centers, known from linear B tablets and monumental architecture, show destruction or abandonment in multiple places. Major sites such as Pylos, Mycenae, Tiryns, and Thebes display destruction layers or signs of sharp decline between roughly 1200 and 1100 BC. The collapse is regional rather than instantaneous. Some centers fall earlier, others later. In some areas, continuity is visible at a lower level of complexity. Excavations record burned rooms, toppled walls, and the abandonment of storage facilities and administrative quarters that had coordinated long-distance trade and resource redistribution. The archaeological record confirms a contraction of palatial authority. Elite-controlled redistribution systems ceased to function at scale, and the production of high-quality, palace-associated goods declines markedly. Two immediate material indicators of the transition are the disappearance of linear B writing and the change in pottery and material culture. Linear B tablets, used administratively at palaces, are absent after about 1100 BC, indicating the end of that script and the administrative systems it supported. Pottery sequences move from the elaborate late Mycenaean whereas into simpler forms characterized in the sequence as sub-Mycenaean and then proto-geometric styles. Proto-geometric pottery appears roughly in the 10th century BC, and by the 9th century BC, the geometric style becomes widespread. These ceramic styles are important chronological markers and also reflect changes in workshop organization, consumption patterns, and symbolic language. Settlement patterns change in scale and distribution. Large palace towns fragment into smaller villages, often sited on defensible heights or dispersed across rural landscapes. In some regions, long-occupied settlements are abandoned while new ones appear in different locations. The number of known sites declines in the immediate post-palatial centuries, and surface surveys frequently record fewer artifacts per site compared with the late Bronze Age. This suggests lower population density in many areas. Demographic recovery is gradual and uneven, with some regions rebounding faster than others. Fortified settlements become less common initially, though in later centuries local fortification and hilltop refuges reappear in response to renewed inter-community competition. Economically, the integrated long-distance exchange networks that sustain palace economies break down. Imports of luxury goods from the Eastern Mediterranean and Egypt declined sharply in many contexts, and the distribution of high-status metalwork and crafted items becomes more localized. Bronze continues to be used, but the wider disruptions in copper and tin supply chains and the changes in demand lead to a greater role for iron. The transition from bronze to iron is not instantaneous and does not mean the disappearance of bronze. Iron working appears gradually, with iron used first for small tools and weapons, and only later for a wider array of objects. Ironworking technology spreads through the Eastern Mediterranean from the late 2nd millennium into the 1st millennium BC. By the 9th to 8th centuries BC, iron tools and weapons are more common in Greek assemblages. The practical effect of iron is important for agriculture and warfare, enabling different patterns of production and local conflict when the technology becomes established. Social organization shifts from palace-centered polities toward kin-based, household-dominated units, and local chieftaincies. Elite display continues, but on a reduced scale. Grave goods and funerary monuments become less monumental in many areas. Burial practices vary regionally, but there is a general simplification compared to the shaft graves and large tholos tombs of the earlier Bronze Age. In some places, cremation increases; in others, inhumation persists. The reduced scale of elite display suggests a redistribution of wealth and authority into more localized forms, where powerful families or small coalitions exercise control without the bureaucratic apparatus of a central palace. Oral culture becomes the primary carrier of communal memory. The later composition of epic poetry, the body associated with the Iliad and Odyssey, preserves fragments of Mycenaean social memory and heroic narratives that must have circulated orally for generations. These epics, when eventually transcribed in the Archaic period, reveal elements of Mycenaean material life, names of Bronze Age places, and social forms that had otherwise vanished from administrative records. The epics are not straightforward historical documents, but they are crucial evidence for continuity in memory and identity across the centuries of contraction. Regional variability is a fundamental feature of the Dark Ages. Areas of the Aegean differ in their trajectories. Some coastal regions and islands that maintain maritime contacts recover and re-expand more quickly than inland areas. Certain peripheral regions show continuity in local craft traditions and even maintain limited external contacts. Crete, with its long Minoan tradition and later Mycenaean influence, demonstrates its own complex sequence. Minoan palatial collapse precedes or overlaps Mycenaean disruption, and the island's later sequence shows distinctive local developments. The comparison between regions warns against a single, uniform narrative. The so-called Dark Ages were a mosaic of decline, adaptation, and local reinvention. By the 9th century BC, material indicators show a slow demographic and economic recovery in many parts of Greece. The spread and elaboration of geometric pottery, often decorated with bands, concentric circles, and later figural motifs, reflect renewed craft specialization and social signaling. Settlement size begins to increase again in some regions, and new forms of social organization emerge. The reintroduction of writing via adaptation of an alphabet derived from Phoenician script will occur in the early part of the following century. However, the conditions for alphabetic literacy are prepared by these centuries of renewed trade and contact. Political life during the Dark Ages is largely local. The polis as a concept does not yet exist in its later institutionalized form, but the foundations of the city-state begin to take shape through processes of territorial consolidation and the strengthening of local religious and social centers. Sanctuaries and cult sites gain importance as focal points for community identity and inter-community exchange. Shared religious practices, particularly the competitive festivals and hero cults that later characterized the archaic and classical periods, have precursors in these centuries. Sanctuaries serve as meeting places for communities, as places to deposit votive offerings, and as loci for the rituals that maintain social memory. Warfare during the Dark Ages is not absent, but it is different in scale and organization from the mass chariot battles or palace-based military logistics of the Late Bronze Age. Bands of armed men, often organized around kinship groups, engage in raids, localized territorial conflicts, and seasonal competition. Weapon types change along with metallurgy. Lighter, iron-tipped weapons become more common in certain contexts, and the emphasis shifts toward infantry-based combat. The later hoplite formations of the archaic and classical periods have structural roots here in the social and military adaptations that occur as populations consolidate around local agrarian economies. Economic adaptation includes the intensification of agriculture and the diversification of craft production. Small-scale workshops and household-based production replace palace-run manufacturing. Local elites patronize craftsmen, but large-scale centralized production is absent. Olive and grape cultivation increased in economic importance in many regions, laying the groundwork for the agricultural staples that will sustain urban growth in the Archaic period. Maritime activity recovers selectively. Coastal and island communities resume trade and exchange networks, often connecting with Phoenician and Levantine traders. These contacts are crucial vectors for technological and cultural exchange, including the passage of alphabetic writing that will be adapted to the Greek language and needs. Cultural shifts in the Dark Ages include the creation of visual and symbolic vocabularies that will be elaborated later. The geometric motifs on pottery are not merely decorative. They form a new visual grammar that expresses social affiliations, funerary practices, and shared cultural codes. The emergence of local hero cults and ancestor veneration reflects changing social arrangements as households and extended families become central units of identity. These religious and symbolic changes are both responses to and drivers of social cohesion in a period without palace-level institutions. By the late 9th and into the 8th century BC, the archaeological record shows increased signs of social complexity returning. Larger settlements reappear. Long-distance trading resumes in greater measure. Craft specialization increases, and the ideological frameworks expressed in pottery, burial practice, and ritual begin to form recognizable precursors to the institutions of the archaic polis. Population growth in coastal areas and islands encourages maritime colonization in the following centuries. The oral traditions that have preserved memory, now coupled with renewed contact, and the adoption of an alphabet, set the stage for the political, social, and cultural transformations that will define the next period. This account of the Dark Ages stresses measurable change. Collapse of palatial administrative structures by about 1100 BC, disappearance of linear stylistic shifts in pottery from sub-Mycenaean through proto-geometric and geometric phases, regional variation in recovery, gradual spread of iron technology, and the reformation of local social institutions. These processes are incremental and regionally varied rather than uniform, and they culminate in the conditions that enable the archaic revival and the emergence of the polis system in the centuries that follow. Around 800 BC, a series of interlocking developments transformed the fragmented communities of the post-Mycenaean centuries into the social, political, and cultural formations historians call the Archaic period. This transformation was not sudden. It was the result of demographic recovery, renewed trade, technological diffusion, and the reconfiguration of social institutions. The Archaic revival sets the structural conditions for the polis, the emergence of literate record-keeping, colonization across the Mediterranean, and the religious and cultural practices that will define classical Greek identity. This segment follows those processes in measurable detail. The adoption of the alphabet, the expansion of trade and colonization, the rise of the polis as a political form, the consolidation of cultic centers, and the material signs of increasing social complexity between 800 and 700 BC. The most consequential technological and communicative innovation of the period is the adaptation of an alphabetic script derived from Phoenician models. The Phoenician trading networks of the Eastern Mediterranean brought both goods and writing systems into contact with Greek speakers. Greeks modified the Phoenician consonantal script to represent vowel sounds as well as consonants, creating the first true alphabet suited to Indo-European morphology. The earliest alphabetic inscriptions in Greek appear in the late 9th and 8th centuries BC on pottery, stone, and metal, often as short dedications, owner's marks, or commemorative graffiti. Alphabetic literacy initially spreads unevenly, used by artisans, merchants, and sanctuary officials, but within a century it will support more complex uses: record-keeping, laws, monumental inscriptions, and eventually the recording of epic and lyric poetry. Material culture records this revival in clear stylistic terms. Proto-geometric pottery of the 10th century gives way to geometric pottery in the 9th and 8th centuries. By the early 8th century, figural representation returns to the ceramic repertoire with human and animal forms articulated in bands of meanders and concentric motifs. These increasingly complex decorative programs reflect workshop specialization and the existence of markets that reward visual innovation. Metalworking techniques improve. Bronze vessels and votive objects reappear in greater numbers at sanctuaries and graves. The growth in artisan skill indicates a wider degree of craft differentiation than in the immediate post-Mycenaean centuries. Demography and settlement patterns offer quantifiable evidence of recovery. Surface survey and cemetery counts show increasing numbers of habitation sites in many parts of the Aegean and mainland Greece. Villages expand into proto-urban centers at advantageous locations: acropolis sites, port towns, and fertile plains. Some sites that had been abandoned are reoccupied, while others grow beyond their Bronze Age footprints. The growth is uneven. Coastal regions that maintained or revived maritime contacts tend to expand earlier than inland uplands. This rising population density supports more complex social organization and the mobilization of surplus for monumental and communal projects. Trade and colonization drive much of the economic expansion. Greek communities, facing population pressure and the opportunity to exploit new markets, established colonies across the Aegean, the western coast of Asia Minor, southern Italy, Sicily, and beyond. These colonies are not mere outposts. They function as independent polis with dynastic, religious, and economic ties to their mother cities. Colonization follows multiple logics: escape from internal social pressures, access to agricultural land and mineral resources, and the desire to control trade routes. The presence of Greek pottery and other artifacts in the central and western Mediterranean attests to both the movement of people and the diffusion of Greek material culture. Maritime commerce expands in volume and geographic scope. Greek traders exchange local products, olive oil, wine, ceramics, and metalwork, for Eastern luxuries and raw materials. Contacts with Phoenician and Euboean seafarers facilitate the transfer of technology and ideas. Ports and emporia develop into nodes of economic exchange where local elites and merchant families accumulate wealth. This wealth, in turn, funds public sanctuaries, athletic festivals, and building projects that articulate communal identity. The increasing economic differentiation between merchants, landowners, and artisan classes generates new social tensions that will surface in later political conflicts. Religious practice consolidates around sanctuaries that function as both sacred spaces and civic centers. Sites such as Delphi, Olympia, and regional hero shrines acquire structural features: temples, treasuries, altars, and organized pan-Hellenic gatherings. Religious festivals become venues for political negotiation, economic exchange, and the display of elite patronage. Votive offerings at these sanctuaries increase in variety and number, indicating both personal piety and communal investment. The institutionalization of cult practices contributes to a shared Hellenic identity that transcends local ethnic differences and supports interpolis networks of obligation and prestige. The polis emerges as the defining political unit through a process of territorial consolidation and institutional innovation. Where once power had been expressed in palace or chieftaincy, new forms of civic organization develop: assemblies of free male citizens, councils of elders, and magistrates with defined roles. The polis is not uniform. It appears in diverse forms, from the militarized gerontocratic order of Sparta to the aristocratic oligarchies of early Athens and Corinth. Nevertheless, the shared structural elements, the territorial community, the institutionalized civic cult, and the mechanisms for collective decision-making create the conditions for the later political vocabularies of citizenship and law. Archaeological traces of agora spaces, mosque-like clustering of public buildings, and boundary markers reflect the increasing territorial consciousness of these communities. Law and social regulation begin to be expressed in written forms, facilitated by the alphabet. Early legal inscriptions are sparse in this period, but the increasing use of writing for public and sacred purposes establishes the groundwork for codified law in the following century. The practice of inscribing dedications, treaties, and boundary agreements on stone produces durable records that both legitimate and constrain elite action. Simultaneously, oral customary law persists in local dispute resolution and social practice. The interplay of oral custom and emergent written record shapes the hybrid legal culture of the archaic polis. Military organization adapts to the social and technological realities of the era. The hoplite, an infantryman equipped with a thrusting spear, large circular shield, and body armor, begins to appear as a dominant battlefield figure in the late 8th and 7th centuries. Hoplite warfare favors citizen soldiers who share the costs of equipment, producing a degree of social cohesion among those who fight together. The phalanx formation requires coordination and discipline, rewarding communities that can train and field these militias. Hoplite equipment is costly. Its distribution reflects wealth disparities and encourages the formation of military elites who translate battlefield leadership into political influence. Cultural expression becomes more public and self-conscious. The composition and performance of lyric poetry, poets such as Archilochus and Tertius in later decades, reflects civic values, war, and social critique. The early development of monumental sculpture, votive statuary, and architectural decoration signals the growing confidence of elite patrons. Funerary markers and hero cults elaborate communal memory and lineage. This artistic flourishing is pragmatic. It marks status, commemorates deeds, and secures social position within an increasingly complex civic hierarchy. Economic specialization deepens with craft workshops producing standardized ceramics, metal goods, and textile production for local and external markets. The evidence of standardized weights and measures in this period shows an intensification of market exchange and the need for reliable systems of valuation across broader geographies. Coinage proper does not appear until the late 7th and 6th centuries in some Greek regions, but the fiscal practices and commercial networks that will support monetization are established in these decades. Social tensions intensify as wealth accumulation concentrates in the merchant and landowning classes. Population pressure and land scarcity prompt the redistribution of land through colonization and, in some polis, lead to social unrest that will demand institutional reform. Gender roles in the archaic period remain highly structured. Elite women manage household resources and act as religious patrons, while their public political roles are limited. In the Greek household economy, oikos-based organization governs labor and production, yet the increasing scale of public life beginning in this period slowly alters the balance between the private and communal spheres. Regional variation continues to be a defining feature of the archaic revival. Ionia on the western coast of Asia Minor develops a distinctive urban and intellectual life influenced by contact with Anatolian and Near Eastern polities, producing early philosophical inquiry and advanced craft traditions. Corinth leverages its strategic position to dominate certain trade routes and becomes a center for pottery innovation. Attica's growth sets the stage for Athenian political experiments, while the Peloponnesian mainland gives rise to the distinctive martial culture of Sparta. These regional specializations contribute to an interdependent mosaic in which competition and exchange drive innovation. By the close of the 8th century, the material and institutional signs of a new Greek civilization are clear. Alphabetic literacy is spreading, craft production and trade are expanding. The polis form is emerging in multiple variants. Sanctuaries and festivals link communities across the Aegean, and military organization is adapting to the social realities of citizen militias. These developments do not eliminate local particularities, but they do create a shared framework of institutions, practices, and symbols that will carry into the archaic and classical centuries. The period between 800 and 700 BC thus constitutes the decisive recovery from post-Mycenaean fragmentation and the foundational stage for the political, intellectual, and cultural achievements that follow. During the 7th century BC, The scattered communities that emerged from the archaic revival consolidated political forms that historians identify as the polis. The polis is not a fixed blueprint, but a suite of related institutions, a defined territory as central settlement, often with an acropolis, an agora as a focal public space, a civic cult that anchored communal identity, magistracies and councils, and an ethos of shared obligations among a bounded body of citizens. The rise of the polis between roughly 700 and 600 BC reflects demographic growth, intensified economic exchange, and social pressures that required new mechanisms for governance, resource allocation, and conflict resolution. This segment analyzes the physical, legal, military, and religious dimensions of that transformation and traces the variety of forms in which the polis manifested across Greece. Urban morphology provides tangible evidence for the new civic order. Archaeological traces show expanding settlement pithoi, centralized storage, and the appearance of organized public spaces. The Acropolis, a defensible high point, retained older ritual significance and became a site for temples and treasuries. The agora developed as a multifunctional area for market exchange, legal adjudication, and political assembly. Public architecture in this period remains modest compared with later classical temples, but increasingly deliberate site planning indicates the mobilization of communal labor and surplus. Burial grounds and monumental funerary markers located outside urban cores signal emerging distinctions of civic belonging and lineage. Politically, many polis crystallized oligarchic regimes dominated by landed aristocracies or leading families. These elites justified authority through hereditary claims, control of land and resources, leadership in war, and ritual precedents. Councils of elders, often termed geronts or equivalent local names, and aristocratic assemblies provided the institutional framework for decision-making. At the same time, assemblies of wider citizen bodies, beginning as ad hoc gatherings and gradually becoming structured institutions, emerged as venues where free adult males could participate in communal decisions. The balance of power between oligarchic councils and popular assemblies varied by polis and was negotiated over decades through conflict, accommodation, and legal innovation. Legal formalization begins to appear in this period. Oral customary norms persist, but the need to limit elite arbitrariness and settle contentious property and homicide cases leads some communities to inscribe laws. The most famous early example is the lawgiver's tradition. Draco of Athens is recorded as producing a written code in the early 7th century, commonly dated to c. 621 BC. Draco's laws are remembered for their severity and for the transfer of legal authority from oral recitation and elite arbitration to publicly posted statutes enforceable by magistrates and juries. Whether Draco's code was uniformly applied or selective in scope, the critical institutional innovation is the idea that written law could constrain elite power and provide predictable legal standards. Other polis developed similar mechanisms: oaths, sworn witnesses, and public records that reduce reliance on private vengeance and stabilize inter-household relations. Sparta offers a distinctive case of constitutional development in this period, though its precise chronology resists neat dating. The Spartan constitution, the Great Retrotradition, is conventionally attributed to a figure named Lycurgus, whose historicity is debated and whose reforms likely crystallized over generations. By the 7th century, Sparta exhibits recognizable features: a dual kingship combining sacred and military roles, a council of elders, Gerousia, including the kings and appointed elders, an assembly of Spartan citizens, Apella, and evolving regulatory institutions focused on communal discipline and military readiness. Spartan society increasingly centers on a militarized social order with intense emphasis on land redistribution among citizen families, the kleros system, and the institutional training of male citizens, the agoge. These features produce a durable oligarchic militarized polis that contrasts with the more open commercial and political experiments of other city-states. Economic structures underpinning the polis are diverse but increasingly differentiated. Agriculture remains central. Mixed cereal cultivation, vine and olive groves, and animal husbandry form the core productive base. The expansion of olive oil and wine as exportable commodities alters local economies. Producers who organize surplus for exchange can accumulate resources that translate into political influence. Artisan specialization intensifies. Full-time potters, metalworkers, and textile producers cluster near urban centers and sanctuaries. Coastal polis with favorable harbors, notably Corinth and several Ionian cities, leverage maritime commerce to build wealth that supports monumental patronage and mercantile elites. The rise in standardized weights and measures and the use of bullion for long-distance trade indicate increasing economic complexity, even before widespread coinage. Colonization continues to be a major pressure valve for population growth and social tensions. Groups, sometimes driven by aristocratic interests, sometimes by whole household parties, establish new settlements in southern Italy, Sicily, the western Aegean, and along the Black Sea littoral. These colonies function as independent polis yet retain religious and kin ties to their metropolis. Colonization redistributes population, creates networks of trade and kinship, and introduces Greek institutions into new ecological and political environments. The foundation of new polis also creates opportunities for ambitious elites to secure land and status without disrupting domestic property relations at home. Military evolution during this century is central to civic identity. The hoplite equipment, helmet, large circular aspie shield, spear, and body armor, becomes more widespread and affordable for an expanding class of smallholders and wealthy artisans. The communal nature of hoplite warfare fosters a political logic. Men who fight shoulder to shoulder develop shared interests in collective decision-making and mutual defense. Phalanx tactics require cohesion and training that are most feasible in communities capable of organizing regular drills and equipping citizen soldiers. Consequently, military organization intersects with social status. Hoplite service confers prestige and political leverage on those obliged to purchase and maintain arms. The changing character of war, less dependent on chariotry and elite raiding, more reliant on infantry formations, reshapes leadership patterns and rewards communal discipline. Religious life consolidates around civic cults. Sanctuaries and temple precincts host votive offerings, regulate calendars, and govern festivals that synchronize social life. Civic cults to local gods and heroes bind residents through shared ritual obligations and collective memory. Panhellenic sanctuaries, Olympia, Delphi, and others, acquire increasing political salience as venues for interstate negotiation, treaty renewal, and the display of communal prestige. The material culture of sanctuaries, terracotta figurines, bronze dedications, and early wooden or stone cult images, documents both localized devotional practice and competitive investment by emergent elites. Festivals tied to agricultural cycles and military commemoration structure the civic year and provide opportunities for elites to sponsor public works and games. Social stratification becomes more pronounced. Elite families monopolize ritual leadership, political office, and trade connections. At the same time, a larger class of small landholders and urban artisans emerges with the capacity to influence local politics, particularly where their military obligations as hoplites grant them leverage. Dependence relationships deepen. Serf-like laborers, tenant farmers, and helot-like dependents in the Peloponnese fill agricultural labor needs. Slavery expands in scale and integration with household economies, providing labor for both domestic and craft production. Wealth disparities, visible in differences in burial goods, house sizes, and dedicatory practices, produce social tensions that will frequently erupt into political crises or renegotiations of power. Cultural practices both express and legitimate civic structures. Hero cults and ancestor veneration stabilize claims to land and rank. Funerary monuments signal family continuity and urban belonging. Poetry and oral performance continue to shape public life. Lyric poets compose works for symposia and public gatherings that praise patrons, commemorate victories, and comment on civic values. Visual arts begin to show iconography linked to civic myths and local foundation stories, reinforcing shared narratives that legitimize elite claims and sustain communal cohesion. Legal and fiscal innovations advance incrementally. Inscribed records of dedications, boundary agreements, and public decrees, though not yet widespread, begin to function as durable markers of civic order. Magistracies, early archons, polemarchs, and treasurers assume responsibilities for religious supervision, military command, and fiscal administration. Public treasuries attached to sanctuaries and eventually to leagues provide institutional frameworks for collective expenditures. The emergence of civic offices standardizes responsibilities and creates pathways for elite competition within institutional channels rather than through violence alone. Interpolis interaction intensifies in the forms of rivalry, alliance, and cultural exchange. Trade fosters interdependence, but competition for resources, colonies, and prestige leads to frequent skirmishes and shifting diplomatic arrangements. Amphictyonic and religious associations provide early precedents for institutional cooperation. Leagues and ad hoc coalitions stabilize certain regions temporarily. Neighboring polis negotiate boundaries, exchange hostages, and settle disputes through ritualized mechanisms that reduce the costs of conflict and underpin economic exchange. Regional variation remains pronounced. Ionian cities on the western Anatolian shore display sophisticated mercantile cultures with early intellectual ferment. Corinth channels its entrepreneurial energy into pottery styles and maritime dominance. Attica consolidates around Athens with increasing centralization of the demi-system and landholding patterns that will later be formalized. The Peloponnese incubates oligarchic and militarized variants. Local environmental conditions, soil fertility, access to timber and metals, harbor configuration, shape economic trajectories and therefore political institutions. The rise of the polis by 600 BC thus emerges from an array of measurable processes: settlement expansion and urban reorganization, legal codification and institutional office development, military innovations that tie landholding to civic obligation, economic specialization and maritime commerce, colonization that redistributes population, and religious consolidation that legitimizes civic order. These processes produce durable civic forms, distinct in place and practice, that provide the institutional substrate for the political experiments, social conflicts, and cultural achievements of the subsequent century. The century from 600 to 500 BC is marked by a concentrated sequence of political experiments and institutional transformations across the Greek world. Social pressures generated by demographic recovery, intensified trade, and widening wealth disparities produced recurring crises in many polis. These crises were resolved in different ways: by the seizure of power by single rulers known as tyrants, by the codification of law to curb aristocratic excess, or by wider constitutional reforms that redistributed political authority. This segment examines the causes of these changes, the mechanics of tyranny, the major case studies, especially Athens, Corinth, and Samos, and the legal and constitutional reforms that reshaped civic life, culminating in the Athenian settlement that established the foundations of broader citizen participation. The background is structural. Between the late 8th and early 7th centuries, population growth and the success of colonies increased pressure on arable land. At the same time, maritime trade and artisanal production created new sources of wealth outside traditional landed aristocracies. Merchant families and wealthy artisans accumulated resources that enabled them to compete with landowners for influence. Military change mattered as well. Hoplite warfare placed economic weight on those who could afford armor and weapons, creating a class of armed citizens whose collective interests differed from the older aristocratic warband. The combination of land scarcity, economic differentiation, social tensions, and militarized citizenry created repeated openings for non-traditional leaders to propose new orders and to seize power. Tyrant, in the Greek context, does not correspond precisely to the modern pejorative. It denotes a ruler who attained power outside the traditional hereditary frameworks, often by direct action, supported by a faction of allies, mercenaries, or disaffected hoplites. and who exercised authority without the normal constitutional constraints of an oligarchic council. Many tyrants seized power by promising relief from aristocratic monopolies of land and office, by presenting themselves as protectors of the poor or the mercantile classes, or by leveraging personal followings built on wealth, charisma, or military force. Once in power, tyrants varied widely. Some established repressive regimes, others invested in economic development and public patronage that won popular support. In several cases, tyrannies encouraged artistic production, sponsored festivals, and promoted infrastructural works that enhanced both the ruler's prestige and the community's economic base. Athens provides the most studied sequence of legal and political responses to these pressures. The Cylonian attempt at seizure circa 632 BC had exposed the fragility of elite rule and produced long-term factionalism. In response to chronic unrest, Athens turned to written law as a mechanism for limiting elite arbitrariness and stabilizing social relations. The Athenian lawgiver Draco, traditionally dated to about 621 BC, is associated with the earliest recorded codification. Draco's laws are remembered in ancient sources for their severity, but the crucial development is procedural. Law is publicly posted, and crimes become matters for community adjudication rather than private vendetta. The written code creates a predictable legal framework upon which political negotiation can proceed. Social tensions re-emerged in the early 6th century. Debt slavery and economic dependency persisted as structural problems. In the crisis context, the lawgiver Solon, appointed archon and tasked with reform, enacted measures typically dated to around 594 to 593 BC. Solon's reforms, explicitly pragmatic, sought to redress the immediate economic emergency and to restructure the political order. On the economic front, Solon enacted the Sysaxia, a set of measures generally understood to include the cancellation or alleviation of certain debts and the prohibition of enslavement for debt in Athens. He rebalanced obligations between creditors and debtors to prevent cyclical dispossession. Politically, Solon reorganized the citizen body into 4 property-based classes measured by agricultural produce, measured in metamnoi, the Pentacosio-metamnoi, those producing 500 or more metamnoi, the Hippias, 300 to 499, the Zeugatai, 200 to 299, and the Vites, below 200. Eligibility for magistracies and council membership was tied to these property classes, while political voice in certain assemblies was broad-based. Solon's creation of the bull, a council to prepare business for the citizen assembly, was a durable institutional innovation, though the exact size and composition attributed to Solon are matters of later tradition. Solon also promoted economic measures designed to stimulate industry and trade, such as encouraging olive cultivation and limiting the export of certain staple crops to secure the domestic food supply and to foster a commodity, olive oil, that could support trade. Solon's settlement aimed at compromise rather than radical redistribution. It left intact significant aristocratic influence while providing legal protections and a measure of civic access to a broader base. The arrangement produced short-term stability, but also set conditions in which future actors could mobilize for greater change. In mid-6th century Athens, the populist faction found expression under Pisistratus, who seized power by exploiting factional divisions and the discontent of non-elite groups. Pisistratus established himself as tyrant in several episodic seizures, the most effective consolidation occurring around 546 BC, and ruled in a manner that balanced autocratic control with visible public investment. Sources credit his regime with sponsoring building projects, promoting Pan-Athenian festivals such as the Panathenaea, patronizing poetry and performance, and supporting smallholders. Pisistratus' administration centralized revenues, created opportunities for the non-aristocratic wealthy, and maintained stability by co-opting local elites into administrative roles. His rule demonstrated a second model of tyranny, centralized authority used to underwrite civic culture and economic growth. After his death, traditionally dated 527/526 BC, his sons briefly held power until their expulsion in 510 BC, a moment that opened the pathway for deeper constitutional change. In parallel to Athens, Corinth demonstrates another trajectory. The Cypselid tyranny, beginning with Cypselus around 657 BC, followed by his son Periander, transformed Corinth into a commercial powerhouse. Corinth's strategic position on the isthmus and its management of overland transport across the Dialkos allowed control of commerce between the Aegean and the Western Mediterranean. Periander invested in infrastructure, colonization, and the promotion of craft industries, particularly pottery, which became widely traded. The Corinthian model fuses economic dynamism with centralized control. The tyrant secures trade routes, organizes production, and extracts surplus that sustains both courtly magnificence and civic projects. Periander's long rule, 6th century, illustrates how enduring tyranny could stabilize and amplify mercantile prosperity while also provoking elite resentment that reasserted itself after a tyrant's fall. Samos under Polycrates, c. 538 to 522 BC, exemplifies maritime tyranny. Polycrates built a powerful navy, controlled offshore trade, and extended Samian influence across the eastern Aegean. His regime engaged in piracy and mercantile expansion, but also in substantial urban investment, harbors, fortifications, and monumental architecture. Polycrates' diplomatic activity, alliances that at times included links with Egypt, reveals how tyrants managed interstate relations through a combination of naval power and commercial patronage. His eventual downfall, orchestrated by Persian intervention in the early 6th century of the century's close, demonstrates the geopolitical limits of island-based tyranny when larger imperial forces intervene. Beyond these prominent cases, tyrannies also appear in other Greek regions, including parts of Sicily, and the Western Greek colonies, where rulers such as Gelon and Hieron later exploit the model established in the mainland polis. In Sicily, the combination of fertile land, mercantile outlets, and competition among Greek and native elites created frequent openings for strongmen to seize control, often with the backing of mercenary bands and with the rhetoric of protecting the demos against aristocratic predation. While tyrannies offered one resolution to the crisis, other polis pursued legal codification and institutional redesign to contain elite power. Lawgivers appear in multiple local traditions, sometimes semi-legendary, who provided written norms that curbed private violence and established public adjudication mechanisms. The shift from private feud to public legal procedure reduces the pretext for seizing power through vendetta and offers a more predictable environment for economic exchange and elite competition. The spread of inscriptional practice, deeds, dedications, boundary markers, and public decrees creates material anchors for civic memory and constrains arbitrary rule. The culmination of these processes in Athens arrives in the reforms conventionally associated with Cleisthenes around 508 to 507 BC. Cleisthenes measures reorganized Attic politics by breaking older clan-based divisions and constructing a new territorial basis for civic identity. He redivided Attica into demes, local units, grouped them into trides, coastal, inland, and city thirds, and combined these into 10 new tribes, phylae, that mixed populations from disparate regions. This reorganization countered aristocratic monopolies that had relied on concentrated territorial power. Cleisthenes also reconstituted the bull as a council of 500 with 50 members from each tribe, ensuring broader participation in setting the political agenda. The reforms enabled a new balance: institutional pathways for political advancement beyond hereditary privilege, and mechanisms, such as the practice of ostracism, to exile individuals deemed dangerous to the polis without bloodshed. The Cleisthenic settlement moves Athens toward a more inclusive civic framework in which institutional competition replaces recurrent violent seizures of power. The century's legal and constitutional innovations are paralleled by cultural and economic shifts. Tyrants who invested in public festivals, monumental dedications, and patronage of the arts helped to institutionalize shared cultural practices that transcended narrow family loyalties. At the same time, the expansion of markets and the beginnings of coinage in adjacent Anatolian polities and Lydia by the late 7th century create monetary logics that will reshape Greek economies in the following century. The rise of mercenary labor, the mobility of craftsmen, and the spread of literacy all contribute to a complex social fabric in which residence, economic role, and military obligation interact to determine political standing. By 500 BC, the Greek world displays a plural set of political outcomes from similar pressures: entrenched oligarchies, enduring tyrannies that foster economic expansion and cultural sponsorship, and emergent constitutions that, through law and institutional redesign, attempt systematic political inclusion. Each polis negotiates these pressures according to its geography, economic base, and military capacity. The competing trajectories, autocracy, codified oligarchy, and broad-based civic participation will define the opening decades of the 5th century and shape the political alignments that confront external challenges from the Persian Empire. The conflict between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire that unfolded between 499 and 479 BC arose from a chain of political, economic, and imperial pressures centered on the Eastern Aegean. Persia's westward expansion in the 6th century BC, under Cyrus and Darius, had incorporated the Ionian Greek cities of Asia Minor into a satrapal system. These Ionian polis retained Greek civic institutions and cultural ties with the mainland while living under Persian administrative and fiscal control. Rising demands for tribute, Persian interventions in local politics, and the replacement of independent oligarchies with Persian-friendly regimes created recurring friction. The flashpoint was the Ionian Revolt, 499 to 494 BC, an uprising by Ionian cities that combined local grievances and the broader opportunity created by shifting alliances and the availability of naval and mercenary support. The Ionian Revolt began with local uprisings against Persian-appointed tyrants and their administrators. Aristagoras of Miletus played a leading role by initiating the rebellion and seeking external support. In its early phase, the revolt enjoyed tactical successes and secured aid from some mainland Greek communities. Athens and Eretria supplied ships and volunteers to the Ionians. These contributions were limited in scale, but symbolically important. In 498 BC, the allied Greeks struck the Persian regional center of Sardis, burning parts of the city and demonstrating that Persian control of Asia Minor was contestable. The revolt, however, lacked the cohesion and resource base to sustain a prolonged insurgency against a major imperial power. Darius I responded to the Ionian revolt with determined force once he had suppressed internal disturbances and consolidated authority. Darius campaigned to reassert Persian control over Ionian cities and to punish those who aided the rebellion had both practical and symbolic aims, to deter further revolts in the empire and to demonstrate the Persian capacity to project power into the Aegean. The Persian counter-campaign combined land forces drawn from multiple satrapies and a significant naval armada, the latter reflecting Persian recognition that control of the Aegean littoral required maritime capabilities. The first direct clash between the Persian imperial ambition and mainland Greek resistance occurred in 490 BC, when Darius launched an expedition aimed at punishing Athens and Eretria for their support of the Ionian rebels. The initial Persian force landed on the plain of Marathon, roughly 30 miles northeast of Athens. The Athenians, joined by a small contingent from Plataea, moved to confront the invaders. Under the leadership of generals such as Miltiades, the Athenian hoplite force engaged the Persian army in a pitched battle. The Athenian strategy emphasized heavy infantry shock action in the center and stronger, deliberately arranged wings. The result was a decisive Greek victory at Marathon. Persian casualties and losses of ships compelled the invaders to withdraw across the Aegean, and Darius deferred further immediate efforts against the Greek mainland. The victory at Marathon had immediate military importance and far-reaching political consequences. Militarily, it demonstrated that well-disciplined hoplite forces could defeat Persian expeditionary detachments on favorable terrain. Politically, Marathon became a locus for Athenian pride and a formative event in the consolidation of Athenian civic identity. The Persian defeat did not end the threat. Darius continued to plan a larger punitive expedition, but his death delayed action and transferred the responsibility for Persian policy to his successor, Xerxes I. Xerxes renewed Persian aims in the 480s BC with a far larger and more systematic invasion plan. His campaign combined a massive land army with a substantial fleet intended to secure supply lines and to control the sea lanes of the Aegean. Persian preparations included bridging the Hellespont and constructing logistical works to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies. Xerxes' strategy recognized that controlling the Greek mainland required both terrestrial and naval superiority. The Greek polis, in contrast, faced an existential dilemma. They were politically fragmented, militarily varied, and in many cases structurally unprepared for a coordinated response to a major imperial campaign. Greek response to Xerxes' preparations took several institutional forms. Sparta and Athens, the leading military powers on land and sea, respectively, attempted to coordinate a defensive strategy through a loose confederation of willing polis. At Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass facing the Malian Gulf, a Greek force led by Spartan King Leonidas sought to block the advance of the Persian land army. The Thermopylae engagement in 480 BC demonstrated both the advantages and limits of Greek defensive tactics. A relatively small force, composed of Spartans, Thespians, and other allied contingents, held the pass for several days against continuous Persian attacks, inflicting disproportionate casualties and slowing the enemy advance. The stand at Thermopylae ended when Persian forces outflanked the defenders through a mountain path revealed to them, an action that allowed Xerxes' army to bypass the main barrier and continue southward into central Greece. Concurrently, naval operations unfolded in parallel. The Greek fleet, under Athenian leadership and the strategic direction of Themistocles, contested Persian control of sea lanes in the Straits of Artemisium and later at Salamis. The naval engagements in 480 BC were decisive in limiting Persian operational flexibility. The Battle of Salamis, fought in narrow waters off the coast of Athens, allowed the Greek triremes, light, maneuverable ships powered by rowers, to exploit local conditions and negate the numerical advantage of the Persian fleet. The Greeks executed tactics that emphasized coordinated boarding and ramming in restricted waters, which disrupted Persian formations and inflicted severe losses. The defeat at Salamis compelled Xerxes to reconsider the sustainability of his position. He retreated with a substantial portion of his forces to Asia, leaving a reduced land army in Greece under Persian command. Xerxes' withdrawal did not mark the immediate collapse of Persian ambitions, but it shifted the operational balance. The remaining Persian forces occupied parts of Attica and Boeotia and continued to pose a threat. Greek states seized the strategic initiative. In 479 BC, a coordinated Greek army, composed of Spartans, Athenians, and allied contingents, and a reconstituted Greek fleet moved to confront the Persian remnants on two fronts. The land battle at Plataea reunited Greek hoplite forces in a decisive engagement. Under Spartan leadership, and with important contributions from Athens and other polis, the Greek coalition inflicted a crushing defeat on the Persian land army. In the same year, at Mycale on the Ionian coast, the Greek fleet engaged and destroyed significant Persian naval forces and struck at Persian positions in Asia Minor, facilitating the reassertion of Greek control in the Eastern Aegean. The outcomes of the Persian Wars were multidimensional. First, the immediate military consequence was the preservation of Greek autonomy on the mainland and the Eastern Aegean. Persian attempts at direct conquest and incorporation of the Greek polis into the imperial system had failed. Second, the victories generated a nascent sense of shared Hellenic identity among many Greek communities. This identity was pragmatic rather than ideological. It emerged from the experience of confronting a common external threat and from the practical necessity of military cooperation among otherwise independent polis. Third, the wars reshaped internal Greek politics, enhancing the prestige of certain states, most notably Athens, while revealing the limits of Spartan hegemony beyond the Peloponnese. Athens' maritime contribution, and particularly its ability to translate victory into sustained influence, proved central in the immediate aftermath. Athens had invested in naval capacity by building triremes and leveraging silver revenues, most notably from a newly developed seam at Laurion, to fund ship construction. The Athenian fleet's performance in the wars elevated the city's standing among many polis, enabling Athens to take a leadership role in subsequent collective security arrangements. In the years immediately following the wars, Athens convened and led a coalition that became known as the Delian League, an alliance ostensibly created to deter further Persian aggression and to liberate Greek cities under Persian control. The Delian League's treasury and naval resources, initially anchored on the island of Delos, represented a new form of interstate organization. In practice, it also laid the financial and institutional groundwork for a growing Athenian maritime empire. Politically and culturally, the Persian Wars catalyzed institutional and ideological developments. Cities invested in fortifications, restructured military obligations, and codified practices for interstate cooperation. The experience of coalition warfare encouraged administrative innovations. Councils to coordinate strategy, shared sacrificial and commemorative rituals to bind allies, and systems for resource mobilization. Culturally, the wars furnished a corpus of commemorative inscriptions, poetic memorials, and civic narratives that various polis used to legitimize contemporary political claims. Athens, in particular, commemorated its role through monumental building programs and public festivals that emphasized the city's leadership and the civic virtues ascribed to its citizens. The wars also produced long-term strategic consequences. Persian power in the Aegean was substantially constrained for decades. Satrapal control over Ionian cities weakened as local Greek polities reasserted autonomy. The balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean shifted. Greek naval capacity, centered in Athens, emerged as a dominant force. Persia retained extensive territories, but confronted persistent resistance in peripheral regions, and Macedon, to the north, observed evolving Greek dynamics that would inform its later policies. The Persian invasions had exposed Greek vulnerabilities, political fragmentation, logistic limitations, and the fragility of coalitions. Yet they had also demonstrated that coordinated military effort, particularly combining hoplite infantry and trireme navies, could repel a major imperial threat. The Persian Wars remain pivotal in the chronology of Greek history for these reasons. They halted immediate imperial annexation of mainland Greece, precipitated institutional innovations in interstate coordination, and shifted prestige toward maritime powers capable of sustained naval operations. The military outcomes at Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale established tactical precedents and strategic expectations that shaped subsequent Greek military organization. The war's political aftermath, especially the formation and eventual transformation of the Delian League, initiated a new phase in Greek interstate relations, one that would culminate in shifting alignments and renewed conflict among Greeks themselves in the latter 5th century. Athens' recovery from the Persian Wars culminated in a period of concentrated political power, economic expansion, and cultural production between 479 and 431 BC. This interval is commonly labeled the Golden Age of Athens because the city consolidated naval supremacy, transformed a defensive alliance into an Athenian maritime empire, and sponsored a sustained program of public building and artistic patronage. Simultaneously, Athenian institutions of popular government matured. Intellectual activity accelerated. Dramatic and sculptural forms developed to standards that would define later classical taste. The developments of these 5 decades are structural. Institutional reforms, fiscal reorganization, state-directed cultural programs, and new modes of imperial administration. This segment follows those changes in measurable detail, avoiding rhetorical embellishment and focusing on the civic arrangements and material realities that shaped Athenian life. The immediate post-war context shaped Athens' strategic choices. The city had invested in naval capacity before Xerxes' invasion and proved its utility in the conflicts of 480 to 479 BC. Naval strength now became the principal instrument for projecting power across the Aegean. Athens convened and then led a coalition of allied polis that became known as the Delian League. The League's ostensible purpose was to deter further Persian incursions and to free Ionian cities still under Persian control. Member states initially contributed either ships or monetary tribute to a common treasury, originally kept on the sacred island of Delos. Athenian leadership gradually centralized control. Athens supplied the command structure, provided the flagship fleet, and increasingly managed the League's resources. Over time, the monetary contributions more commonly replaced naval contingents, and Athens built and maintained a permanent navy that served both collective security and Athenian interests. Fiscal mechanisms underpinned this transformation. The silver mines at Laurion in southern Attica, reworked after the Persian Wars, provided a reliable source of state revenue used to build and maintain triremes. Additionally, the transfer of the Delian League's treasury to Athens, completed in the mid-5th century, concentrated wealth in Athenian hands. These funds supported an extensive public program: shipbuilding, fortifications, salaries for public office holders and jurors, and the financing of religious festivals and civic pageantry. Athens adopted administrative practices to collect, account for, and allocate these revenues. Public treasurers and officials administered tribute lists and oversaw expenditures on state projects. The fiscal integration of allied contributions with Athenian budgets turned a cooperative regional defense mechanism into a durable Athenian maritime hegemony. Political institutions adapted to these fiscal and military realities. Democratic procedures established in the late 6th century, assemblies, ecclesia, councils, the Bull of 500, and popular law courts, matured into mechanisms that could mobilize citizens for policy decisions and manage internal affairs. The bull prepared business for the ecclesia and administered daily matters. The assembly of citizens debated and voted on war, finance, and legislation. Athenian democracy remained confined to adult male citizens. Resident aliens, medics, and women were excluded from political rights, and enslaved people formed an important labor force. The Athenian system balanced public access with institutional professionalization. Magistracies rotated by lot or election. Many roles became paid offices to allow poorer citizens to serve without ruinous loss of income. These changes broadened effective political participation among male citizens and anchored civic identity in practices of public speech, accountability, and collective decision-making. Pericles emerges as the central political figure of this era. As a leading statesman from the mid-460s until he died in 429, he shaped Athenian strategy, domestic policy, and cultural investment. Pericles' leadership emphasized maritime power, civic solidarity, and public patronage. He is associated with policies that sustained the Athenian fleet, with administrative measures that strengthened democratic participation, and with a program of monumental construction on the Acropolis. The Periclean building program, undertaken in the mid-5th century, sought to rebuild and embellish Athens after the Persian destruction. Major projects included the Parthenon, a Doric temple with Ionic elements completed in the 440s, for 30s monumental sculptures, and reliefs executed under the supervision of the sculptor Phidias, and other temples, stoas, and public works that transformed the Athenian skyline. These works served multiple functions. They commemorated collective victory, expressed civic identity, and provided employment and patronage that circulated revenue through the Athenian economy. Cultural institutions expanded in scale and public presence. Drama evolved into a central civic medium, organized through state-sponsored festivals such as the City Dionysia. Tragic dramatists like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides staged works that addressed myth, civic responsibility, and ethical dilemmas. Comic dramatists organized responses to contemporary politics and social life. Dramatic competitions were integral to public rituals and functioned as venues for elite patronage and public commentary. Philosophy and historical inquiry advanced in parallel. Inquiry into human affairs, political constitution, ethics, natural phenomena received renewed attention. Historians such as Herodotus had earlier provided narrative frameworks for collective memory, and contemporaries increasingly sought to interpret events systematically. Intellectual activity cultivated a public culture of debate and argument that both reflected and shaped civic life. Art and architecture in this age established standards of proportion, realism, and narrative relief that would dominate Greek visual expression for centuries. Sculpture under Phidias and his circle combined monumental scale with refined naturalism in human representation. The Parthenon's sculptural programs, metopes, frieze, and pedimental groups, visualized civic narratives that linked Athena's patronage with Athenian identity. Painted pottery and small-scale statuary continued to develop technical and iconographic sophistication. Vase painters adopted more naturalistic figural conventions over time. Public monuments and votive dedications displayed both private generosity and state sponsorship, reflecting a political economy in which civic display legitimized leadership and belonging. Athens' social economy was complex. A sizable enslaved population carried out domestic, artisanal, and agricultural labor. Medics provided commercial and technical expertise and paid taxes and special levies while remaining politically disenfranchised. Citizen households, oikoi, remained central to economic life, but increasingly intersected with public provisioning, as the state organized festivals, subsidized grain imports when needed, and provided pay for civic duties. Commercial networks linked Athens to regions across the Mediterranean. Athenian goods, ceramics, metalwork, and agricultural products moved through ports and markets. Monetary practices matured. Athenian coinage, tetradrachms of the Athenian owl type, became widely used in trade and tribute accounting, facilitating market exchange and imperial logistics. The Athenian imperial project had administrative and coercive dimensions. Allied polis paid tribute or provided ships. In some cases, Athenian clerices, settlements of Athenian citizens in allied territory, were used to secure political control and relieve local population pressures. Athens enforced naval blockades, collected tribute, and intervened against rebellious members. The transformation of voluntary alliance into domination provoked resentment among subject states and generated diplomatic friction with major powers, such as Sparta. The use of Delian League funds for Athenian civic projects, perceived by critics as the diversion of common resources, intensified concerns about the legitimacy of Athenian leadership and produced strains that would later factor into interstate conflicts. Military culture and strategy reflected Athenian priorities. The trireme fleet required a large class of skilled rowers, shipwrights, and logisticians. Naval bases, docks, and the harbor of Piraeus, connected to the city by the long walls, embodied the strategic interdependence of Athens and its fleet. The long walls, built during the mid-5th century, physically linked Athens to its port and secured access to maritime supply lines even in the event of a siege. This infrastructure undergirded Athenian strategy. The city could fall back on seaborne resources and project power abroad while relying on allied tribute to sustain its naval dominance. Political contestation persisted internally. Factional disputes, economic inequality, and debates over imperial policy produced recurring tensions. The democratic processes allowed for open debate and political realignment, but they also permitted demagogues to mobilize public sentiment on immediate issues. The use of ostracism as a safety valve mechanism, formalized during the Cleisthenic Constitution, enabled the temporary exile of prominent individuals whose influence was judged dangerous to the polity. Legal procedures, popular courts, and the rhetoric of assembly speeches mediated elite competition, and the public life of oratory became a decisive arena for political influence. Athenian society exhibited notable demographic and social contrasts. The city's population swelled in wartime and during festivals, drawing rural inhabitants, medics, and merchants into the urban economy. Housing, sanitation, and food supply required municipal administration and market regulation. The state instituted measures for grain imports and instituted public distributions in times of shortage to maintain civic stability. Education and paideia for citizen males emphasized physical training, musical instruction, and basic literacy, preparing them for military service and civic participation. Elite families also sought rhetorical training for public office and negotiation. By the early 430s, the tensions that had been brewing between Athens' imperial ambitions, and the autonomy of other Greek states, between oligarchic and democratic tendencies within states, and between rival city coalitions, became acute. Sparta and its allies perceived Athenian power as a challenge to the balance of the Greek world, while Athens defended its empire as the bulwark against Persian revival and the guarantor of maritime security. The institutional, economic, and cultural achievements of Athens during 479 to 431 BC are therefore inseparable from the geopolitical contest that emerged from them. These decades produced a densely organized civic order, cohesive internal institutions, a dominant naval apparatus, and cultural forms that codified and celebrated Athenian identity. They also set the structural conditions: imperial reach, interstate rivalry, and internal political stresses that would precipitate wider conflict in the years immediately following 431 BC. The Peloponnesian War, fought between 431 and 404 BC, was a prolonged collision of rival systems: Athenian maritime empire and Spartan land hegemony, that transformed the political map of Greece. The war's origins lie in decades of rivalry: Athens' expansion through the Delian League, growing economic and naval dominance, and Spartan-aligned distrust produced a balance of antagonisms that a series of crises converted into open conflict. The war unfolded in distinct phases, each with its own operational logic, strategic aims, and political consequences, and the sequence of campaigns, sieges, revolts, and diplomatic maneuvers reshaped institutions, economies, and societies across the Greek world. Hostilities opened with a localized dispute between Corinth and Corcyra and Athenian intervention that exposed interpolis tensions. The formal outbreak came in 431 BC when the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, declared war on Athens. Sparta's strategic advantage lay in its dominant land force and the military model of the hoplite state, while Athens depended on its fleet, the long walls that secured its access to the sea, and its capacity to draw revenue and supplies from maritime networks and allied tribute. The divergent capabilities produced complementary strategies. Sparta invaded Attica with lightning raids and agricultural devastation to compel Athens into land battles, while Athens pursued naval raids, economic coercion of subject allies, and periodic amphibious operations intended to sustain food imports and revenue flows. The initial phase, commonly labeled the Archidamian War, after Sparta's king Archidamus II, centered on recurring Spartan invasions of Attica. Annual or near-annual incursions designed to ravage the Attic countryside, destroy crops, and undermine Athenian fiscal stability. Athens, under the strategic guidance of Pericles in the early years, adopted a defensive land posture. Citizens and rural populations retreated behind the city walls into the protection of the long walls and the harbor of Piraeus, concentrating manpower for naval sorties while relying on imported grain. Pericles' strategy relied on Athens' ability to withstand economic pressure and to use its fleet to secure supply lines and harass enemy coasts. This strategy was severely tested by the outbreak of a devastating plague that struck Athens in 430 BC and recurred in subsequent years. The epidemic, whose precise pathogen remains debated, killed a large portion of the population, including many combatants and non-combatants, and disrupted civic institutions. The plague's immediate political effect was to erode confidence in Periclean leadership and to intensify factional competition within Athens. Pericles himself died in 429 BC, a loss that removed a central stabilizing figure and opened Athenian politics to more aggressive, faction-driven leadership changes. Military fortunes fluctuated in the 420s. Sparta continued to invade Attica periodically, while Athens attempted to profit from naval superiority through coastal raids and support for revolts among Spartan allies. Naval engagements, often indecisive, reflected changing tactical emphases, coordinated trireme actions, surprise raids, and combined amphibious land operations. The war's attritional logic raised the costs of prolonged campaigning for both sides. Diplomacy produced intermittent truces. The most notable is the Peace of Nicias in 421 BC, a negotiated settlement meant to last 50 years. The peace proved fragile. However, it reflected exhaustion rather than a durable resolution of the structural rivalry, and its terms left many contested interests unresolved. The peace collapsed as renewed hostilities and opportunistic diplomacy reshaped alignments. The most consequential Athenian strategic gamble followed in 415 BC with the Sicilian expedition. Motivated by a combination of imperial ambition, concern over Sicilian grain supplies, and factional politics at home, Athens launched a large amphibious expedition against Syracuse and other Sicilian polis. The operation assembled a substantial fleet and army under generals including Nicias, Alcibiades, and Lamachus. Early operations were indecisive. Internal Athenian disagreement and operational delays complicated the campaign. Critically, a political scandal in Athens led to the recall and trial of Alcibiades. He defected to Sparta and advocated for a coordinated Spartan response to suppress Athenian power in the West. The Sicilian expedition ended in catastrophic defeat for Athens between 413 and 412 BC. Athenian forces were trapped, defeated in pitched battles, and many were captured or slaughtered. The fleet was destroyed, or captured. The loss produced immediate military exhaustion, political crisis in Athens, and emboldened Sparta to press strategic advantages beyond traditional northern Peloponnesian raids. Spartan strategy shifted in the early 410s with a new appreciation for naval capacity and with Persian intervention shaping the course of the war. Persia's role became decisive in the war's latter stages. Persian satraps, seeking to reassert influence and to exploit Greek conflict, provided funds to Sparta to build and sustain a fleet capable of contesting Athenian naval supremacy. The provision of Persian gold, often routed through satraps such as Tissaphernes and later Pharnabazus, allowed Spartans to recruit seamen and shipwrights and to ally with anti-Athenian Greek states. The strategic result was a shift from an essentially bipolar land-sea confrontation to a broader, multipolar conflict in which external funding and mercenary forces determined naval balances. Alcibiades reappeared as a pivotal figure after his defection, serving Spartan interests initially and later aligning with Persian interests for a period. Alcibiades exploited factional politics and leveraged personal influence. He eventually returned to Athenian favor briefly and commanded forces in 410 to 406 BC after persuading Athens to undertake renewed naval operations. His career illustrates the personalism and factional opportunism that characterized Greek interstate politics in this era, where individual leaders could shape policy outcomes critically. The war's naval climaxes occurred in a sequence of confrontations culminating in 405 BC at Aegospotami, where the Spartan admiral Lysander, whose leadership had been enabled by Persian funding and by a disciplined naval force, caught the Athenian fleet at anchor and executed a surprise attack that destroyed the principal Athenian naval capacity. The defeat at Aegospotami left Athens unable to secure its grain routes or to relieve blockades. Spartan control of the sea, combined with continued land pressure and subject state revolts against Athenian rule, produced conditions that forced Athens toward negotiation. The political effects of the war within Athens were profound and destabilizing. Military defeats and economic hardship provoked internal coups and constitutional experiments. In 411 BC, a brief oligarchic coup overthrew democratic institutions and established a government known as the 400. Backed by oligarchic factions and naval commanders seeking a different strategic policy, within months this regime collapsed and was replaced by a broader oligarchic government that nevertheless failed to secure stability. Democracy was restored, but the political landscape remained fraught. Radicalization, demagoguery, and the erosion of procedural norms undermined civic trust. The city experienced shortages, inflation, and social dislocation as tribute revenues and maritime income declined. Spartan strategy, once restricted to punitive invasions of Attica, evolved into a combined land-sea approach that aimed at undermining the economic foundations of Athenian power, cutting supply lines, occupying Attic territory, notably the Spartan occupation of Decelia from 413 BC onward, which denied Athens access to its countryside and exposed resources to raiding. Supporting revolts within the Athenian Empire and establishing garrisons to enforce blockades. Spartan control of key naval bases and Persian financial backing sustained these operations and gradually strangled Athenian logistical resilience. The social consequences of the war were extensive. Athens' population, already diminished by plague and casualties, faced famine risks when grain imports were interdicted. The breakdown of imperial markets reduced artisan employment and undermined medic incomes. Enslaved populations experienced heightened exploitation as shortages intensified. The distribution of war burdens, oarsmen, soldiers, and fiscal levies fell disproportionately on certain social groups, stimulating class antagonisms. Literacy and cultural production persisted, but in a more precarious context. Tragedy and historiography from the late stages of the war reflect a society grappling with civic collapse and moral questioning. Diplomacy and interstate realignments continued to alter the war's trajectory. Corinth, Thebes, Argos, and other polis shifted alliances in response to shifting balances of power, local grievances, and Spartan or Athenian overtures. Corinthian resentment at Athenian commercial policies and the loss of influence in the West informed its consistent opposition to Athenian interests. Thebes, wounded by earlier Spartan hegemony, saw opportunities to expand influence as Athens weakened. Persian satraps alternately sought to balance Greek states to their advantage, leveraging financial support to prolong conflict and extract concessions. The final year of open hostilities, for 04 BC, saw Athens forced into capitulation following the effective naval defeat and the Spartan blockade. Athens negotiated terms that stripped the city of its long walls, surrendered its fleet, and accepted the dissolution of the Athenian Empire. Spartan installed oligarchic governments, the so-called 30 tyrants in Athens, attempted to restructure domestic polity and extract resources, producing purges and political repression that reshaped civic life. The institutional consequences were immediate and long-lasting. Athens' imperial prerogatives ended, and Spartan influence reached its peak in the Greek mainland, albeit at the cost of long-term instability across the Hellenic world. The period 404 to 359 BC is one of political fragmentation, shifting hegemonies, and military innovation that together mark a marked decline in the traditional independence and authority of the Greek polis. The Peloponnesian War left Greece exhausted. Manpower was reduced by warfare and epidemic. Agricultural production was disrupted. Trade networks were fractured, and many city-states faced internal political crises. The immediate post-war settlement did not resolve underlying structural problems. It redistributed power without stabilizing interstate relations. Over the next 45 years, Sparta's brief ascendancy gave way to wider coalition warfare. Persian intervention in Greek affairs increased. Thebes temporarily asserted dominance, and the increasing use of mercenary forces and new tactical forms, together with the political vacuum in many polis, prepared the ground for external actors, most notably Macedon, to exploit Greek weakness. The Spartan hegemony that followed Athens' defeat was institutional and coercive rather than consensual. Sparta imposed oligarchic governments in defeated polis and installed garrisons to police tribute and to suppress democratic elements. The Spartan-backed regime in Athens, the 30 tyrants, enacted ruthless purges that generated widespread resistance and culminated in the restoration of democracy in 403 BC. The restoration demonstrated the limits of Spartan imposition. Local political cultures and civic attachments often proved resistant to externally enforced constitutions. Militarily, Sparta remained strongest on land, but it lacked sufficient naval power and administrative capacity to translate temporary victories into stable control of the wider Greek world. The instability of Spartan rule became apparent as the 390s approached. Former allies and subject states resented Spartan interventions and economic controls. The Corinthian War, 395 to 387 BC. A coalition of Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos, supported by Persian funding, challenged Spartan dominance. The conflict combined land battles and naval engagements, and ended in the King's Peace or Peace of Antalcidas in 387 BC, a negotiated settlement brokered by Persia under the Achaemenid court. The terms recognized Persian authority over the Ionian cities and prescribed autonomy for Greek polis, a clause Sparta invoked selectively. The King's Peace formalized Persian influence in Greek affairs and set a precedent for external arbitration. It also exposed a strategic reality. Neither Sparta nor any rival power could secure uncontested hegemony without external backing or sustained fiscal resources. Persian intervention in Greek politics became a recurring determinant. Persian satraps used subsidies to support or undermine Greek leaders and navies, making control of the Aegean a function not only of local military capacity, but of Persian willingness to fund one side over another. This fiscal policy favored states able to secure external gold or that had resources to sustain prolonged warfare. Persian diplomacy sought to pit Greek states against one another while preserving Persian influence over the Ionian littoral. The result was a cycle of shifting alliances mediated by Persian checks, which complicated any durable interstate settlement. Economic dislocation accompanied political turbulence. Many polis saw declines in agricultural yields, interruptions of trade, and loss of markets. The shrinkage of export incomes and tribute flows reduced public revenues. Public works and festivals that had once stimulated economies were curtailed. Enslaved labor remained widespread, but the distributional stresses of prolonged conflict increased social tensions. Urban populations fluctuated. Some cities experienced depopulation as refugees fled warfare or as colonization attracted groups to newly founded sites. Others swelled temporarily when displaced rural populations sought the protection of walls. The uneven economic recovery constrained the capacity of many communities to raise citizen militias or to support extensive mercenary forces over the long term. A significant institutional and military consequence of the period was the increasing reliance on mercenary forces and the professionalization of warfare. The hoplite citizen soldier remained symbolically central, but the fiscal costs of equipping and maintaining citizen forces, especially when campaigns shifted far from home or required prolonged service, made mercenaries increasingly attractive. Greek states employed Thracian peltasts, Thessalian cavalry contingents, and bands of hoplite mercenaries from various regions. These forces could be more flexible than citizen militias. They were available for extended contracts, adaptable to tactical innovations, and often commanded by experienced captains. Reliance on paid troops changed internal politics. Leaders who controlled treasury access or who could secure foreign subsidies gained disproportionate influence, and the capacity to field mercenary armies decoupled military power from narrow local citizenship. Tactical and organizational innovation accompanied the rise of mercenaries. Light-armed peltasts, javelin-armed infantry, proved effective against heavy hoplites when used with mobility and skirmishing tactics. Athenian general Iphicrates in the late 390s, 370s is associated with reforms that improved peltast effectiveness, transforming lighter infantry into decisive field troops against conventional hoplite formations. Eastern warcraft and cavalry tactics, more prominent in Thessaly and increasingly adopted elsewhere, compelled Greek commanders to integrate combined arms approaches. Cavalry, which had been marginal in many city-states due to costs and terrain, gained tactical significance where terrain and resources allowed, foreshadowing the prominence cavalry would have under later Macedonian leadership. Thebes' rise illustrates how tactical innovation and political leadership could translate into rapid geopolitical gains. Theban leaders such as Pelopidas and Epaminondas exploited Spartan overreach and the vulnerabilities of a fragmented Greek world. The Theban military reform emphasized combined arms, innovative use of oblique formations, and the concentrated use of elite infantry. At Leuctra in 371 BC, Epaminondas commanded a Theban army that executed an unconventional tactical deployment. He deepened the left flank to concentrate force against the Spartan right, thereby shattering Spartan hoplite hegemony on the battlefield. The Theban victory at Leuctra had immediate strategic consequences. It undermined Spartan mythic invincibility, encouraged subject populations, most notably the Mycenaean Helots, to revolt or secede, and enabled Thebes to assert regional leadership. The liberation and reconstitution of Messenia under Theban sponsorship was a structural blow to Spartan power. Sparta, as labor base, dependent upon Helot bondage, was eroded as Messenia regained autonomy and established a new city, Messene. Epaminondas' campaigns in the Peloponnese and his foundation of military alliances, such as the Arcadian League, sought to build a durable coalition that could check both Spartan and Athenian ambitions. Theban hegemony was more centrifugal than Napoleonic. It rested on a European balance that required continuous military assertion and adept diplomatic coalitions. The achievement was substantial but short-lived. Epaminondas' death at Mantinea in 362 BC removed the central figure capable of sustaining the Theban order. Mantinea itself was a complex engagement that temporarily checked Athenian recovery but left Thebes without the personal leadership required to maintain its coalition. Regional actors continued to pursue independent policies and to form shifting alliances. Corinth, Argos, and Athens reconstituted spheres of influence, while smaller polis manipulated rival powers to secure municipal autonomy. Some cities experimented with constitutional shifts, oligarchic coups, democratizing reforms, or ephemeral tyranny, reflecting domestic struggles over resource control and political voice. The proliferation of intra-Greek conflict drained resources and produced a sense of strategic exhaustion among many communities. Demographic and social consequences accumulated. The persistence of warfare and the costs of hiring mercenaries increased the social distance between wealthy elites, who could finance foreign troops, and poorer citizens whose capacity for sustained civic duty diminished. In several regions, the demographic base of citizenship contracted as land consolidation, debt, and emigration reduced the number of economically qualified citizens. This contraction altered the civic fabric. Assemblies became smaller, and civic obligations were sometimes met by hired labor or allied contingents rather than by universal citizen service. Diplomacy in this era frequently relied on non-military levers, marriage alliances, hostage exchanges, and religious arbitration. Yet these instruments had limited durability in a context where fiscal advantage and the capacity to pay mercenaries could overturn negotiated settlements. Persian diplomacy intensified the strategic calculus. Satrapal gold could prop up naval forces or secure loyalty, thereby making domestic constitutional choices contingent upon external cash flows. Persia's role thus insulated local rulers from immediate domestic constraints, while simultaneously increasing Greek dependence on foreign funds. By the late 360s BC, a new strand of power projection began to emerge from the north, Macedon. While Macedon had been viewed by many Greeks as a peripheral and partly barbarian monarchy, rural, monarchical, and less institutionally complex than the city-states, events in the 370s and 360s indicate its growing military and political capacity. Internal dynastic consolidation under rulers such as Amyntas III and his successors strengthened central administration, and contact with Greek mercenary practices provided both military skill and tactical knowledge. Macedonian elites began to recruit experienced Greek officers, to adopt hoplite and cavalry tactics, and to exploit the fragmentation south of the Hellespont by asserting claims and intervening in northern Greek affairs. Macedonian capacity to muster cavalry and to control key passes made it a strategic actor capable of influencing southern balances. The culmination of this period is marked by the accession of Philip II in 359 BC, who inherited a kingdom strained by regicide, Illyrian pressure, and internal factionalism. Philip embarked on a program of military and administrative reform that would rapidly alter Macedonian capability, but those reforms, and their consequences belong to the next chronological phase. Within the period 404 to 359 BC, however, the essential pattern is clear. The traditional polis system, based on citizen militias, local fiscal bases, and ritualized interstate interaction, has been weakened by successive wars. The monetization of military power through mercenaries and foreign subsidies, the rise of tactical innovations that favor professional soldiers and cavalry, and the entry of external hegemonic actors. Political fragmentation and economic exhaustion rendered many city-states unable to sustain long-term independence. The stage was set for a new kind of state, centralized, fiscally organized, and militarily innovative, to exploit these weaknesses and to subordinate large parts of the Greek world. Philip II's rise transformed Macedon from a peripheral kingdom into the dominant military and political power in mainland Greece between 359 and 336 BC. His achievements were not a single innovation, but a sustained program of military, fiscal, diplomatic, and administrative reforms that exploited the strategic exhaustion and political fragmentation of the Greek polis after 4 decades of interstate warfare. This segment follows Philip's consolidation of power in Macedon, his reconstruction of armed forces and logistics, his expansion into neighboring regions, the diplomatic and economic instruments he used to secure influence, and the culminating Battle of Corinthia and its institutional aftermath. When Philip assumed the throne in 359 BC, Macedon faced external pressure and internal fragility. His predecessor, Perdiccas III, had been killed in battle against the Illyrians, and the kingdom had suffered territorial losses and raids. Philip, who had spent part of his youth as a hostage in Thebes, returned with first-hand exposure to Theban military practice and Greek political culture. He inherited a monarchy with a shaky fiscal base, a limited professional military, and elites whose loyalty was uncertain. The first phase of Philip's rule focused on stabilizing the realm. He neutralized immediate threats from Illyrian raiders and Thracian bands, reasserted control over Macedonian towns, and secured the mountains and passes that constituted Macedon's natural defenses. These initial campaigns were pragmatic and often brutal. They established the authority necessary to undertake broader reforms. The most decisive of Philip's reforms was military reorganization. He created a cohesive, professional army that combined highly drilled infantry, a capable cavalry arm, engineering and siege capabilities, and tactical flexibility. The infantry centerpiece was the Macedonian phalanx, a formation of heavily armed foot soldiers equipped with the sarissa, a long pike whose effective length historians estimate at roughly 4 to 6 meters. The sarissa projected in front of the formation in dense, bristling arrays, providing unprecedented reach in frontal engagements. Philip standardized equipment, training, and unit organization so that phalanx units could maneuver, maintain formation, and exploit local terrain. The phalanx was drilled to operate in deep ranks. Modern reconstructions and ancient descriptions indicate depths that might range from 8 up to 16 files in combat, depending on tactical aims, producing concentrated forward shock while protecting the flanks with lighter infantry and cavalry. Complementing the phalanx was the reconstitution of Macedonian cavalry, especially the companion cavalry, heteroi. Philip professionalized the cavalry by establishing a corps of well-trained, well-mounted horsemen who served as a decisive shock arm. These mounted companions were deployed to outflank, pursue broken enemy units, or exploit breakthroughs produced by the phalanx. Philip also invested in light cavalry and auxiliary horsemen drawn from allied and subject peoples, notably Thessalian horsemen whose traditions of cavalry were already respected in Greece. The integrated use of heavy phalanx and mobile cavalry produced the combined arms system that would characterize Macedonian success. The phalanx fixed and shaped the battle, while cavalry exploited mobility and created strategic effects. Philip also prioritized siegecraft, logistics, and engineering. He recruited and trained specialist engineers and siege technicians, developed scaling engines, battering devices, and mobile shelters, and ensured that the army had organized supply lines. These capacities allowed him to reduce fortified towns that had previously resisted quick conquest and to operate campaigns across seasons. Philip's armies moved with greater administrative support than most contemporary Greek forces. Pay, supply wagons, established marching orders, and depots reduced the attritional constraints that had limited city-state armies. This professional logistical approach permitted sustained campaigning into Thessaly, Thrace, and the Aegean littorals. Fiscal and economic reforms underpinned military modernization. Philip centralized royal control over key resources and developed fiscal instruments to pay and sustain his forces. He expanded access to mine revenues, particularly gold and silver deposits on Mount Pangaean and in adjacent regions, securing precious metal supplies that could be coined or used to hire mercenaries and buy equipment. He appropriated customs revenues at newly controlled ports, levied tributes on subject towns, and exploited timber and timber export rights from Macedonian and Thracian forests to supply shipbuilding and construction. Standardizing coinage and fiscal practices allowed Philip to implement reliable soldier pay and to offer bounties that attracted Greek mercenaries and technicians. The resultant monetary base was decisive. It made larger, better equipped, and longer-serving field forces feasible. Philip combined military capacity with diplomatic craftsmanship. He used marriage alliances, hostages, and strategic patronage to secure loyalty and to build networks across northern Greece and into the Thessalian plain. His marital diplomacy was extensive. A sequence of marriages tied him to neighboring powers, and his union with Olympias of Epirus produced dynastic legitimacy through the child Alexander. Philip's practice of offering oligarchic constitutions, friendly garrisons, and political patrons in captured cities created local elites dependent on Macedonian protection. He often balanced force with incentives. Cities spared by Philip could expect favorable terms and political backing, while resistance invited siege and harsher settlement. Territorial expansion under Philip followed both opportunity and design. He moved first to secure strategic sites, Amphipolis in 357 BC being a critical example. Amphipolis commanded access to the Strymon River, nearby timber and gold resources, and the route into Thrace. Its acquisition extended Macedonian influence onto the Aegean littoral. Philip consolidated control over the Macedonian coastline, struck alliances and tributary relationships with Thracian rulers, and asserted influence in central Greece by intervening in Thessalian politics. In Thessaly, he won the support of leading aristocratic families and exploited internal divisions to be named Archon of the Thessalian League at times, a position that provided him with cavalry contingents and a platform for further southern operations. In the 350s and 340s BC, Philip systematically neutralized potential regional coalitions. He neutralized the Chalcidian League and destroyed Olynthus in 348 BC after negotiations and protracted conflict. Olynthus' fall removed a potential rival and allowed Philip to consolidate control of central Macedonian trading networks. He exploited Athenian preoccupations and negotiated tactical settlements, such as the Peace of Philocrates in 346 BC, which, while temporarily formalizing Athenian acceptance of Macedonian interests, also bought Philip time and freed his hands for western and northern expeditions. He cultivated client rulers in Thrace, negotiated with Persian satraps when useful, and used bribery and espionage to weaken coalitions opposed to his aims. Philip's approach to Greek polis was multifaceted. He combined coercion, patronage, and institutional guarantees. When Greek cities resisted violently, they were besieged and punished. When they cooperated, they could retain internal constitutions under Macedonian aegis. He promoted Greek elites who backed his policy, installed garrisons where strategic, and allowed a degree of municipal autonomy that masked Macedonian dominance. These practices produced a web of dependencies rather than direct provincial administration. Macedonian authority functioned through clientage, alliance, and military garrisoning, keeping direct administrative burden limited while maximizing strategic control. The culminating strategic test of Philip program was the confrontation with the Greek city-states that coalesced around Athenian and Theban interests. The decisive engagement occurred at Chaeronea in 338 BC. The battle's exact troop numbers remain debated. Ancient sources and modern estimates vary, but the engagement involved significant field armies from both sides and a mix of hoplite contingents, Thessalian cavalry, and Macedonian forces. Philip's tactical arrangements combined the depth of the phalanx with cavalry maneuver and flexible reserves. The Macedonian left, coordinated with companion cavalry, executed offensives that targeted the Allied right and center. The combined pressure broke Greek cohesion, and successive routes of Allied contingents ended effective resistance. Philip's victory at Chaeronea destroyed the possibility of a sustained Pan-Hellenic military resistance to Macedonian leadership. The political aftermath of Chaeronea institutionalized Philip's ascendancy. In 337 to 336 BC, he convened a congress of Greek polis that produced the League of Corinth, a federative structure in which Greek states pledged collective peace among themselves and recognized Philip as hegemon tasked with leading a common war against Persia. Membership in the League was formalized through decrees that guaranteed internal autonomy for member polis in name while committing them to common military obligations. The League established institutional mechanisms, representative councils, and federal oaths that bound members to Philip's strategy. This settlement provided Philip with a veneer of Pan-Hellenic legitimacy for his planned expedition against Persia. He presented Macedonian leadership as the restoration of Greek freedom in Asia, while framing his hegemony as a consensual, if heavily managed political order. Philip's domestic administration prepared the kingdom for sustained projection. He reformed the royal household, delegated military commands to trusted lieutenants such as Parmenion, and professionalized provincial governance where necessary. He encouraged colonization and the founding or refounding of cities to secure lines of supply and to create loyal urban centers. He maintained a standing corps of veteran phalangites and cavalry whose service and pay bound them to the crown rather than to local oligarchs. The Macedonian polity thus acquired the fiscal and military instruments of a state capable of imperial operations. Philip's assassination in 336 BC interrupted the planned Persian campaign and precipitated a succession that placed his son Alexander on the throne. The structures Philip had erected, military reform, fiscal base, diplomatic networks, and the League of Corinth, remained operational and provided the foundation for Alexander's subsequent campaigns. Philip's record from 359 to 336 BC therefore represents a radical restructuring of power in the Greek world. He converted local fragmentation and exhaustion into an opportunity to centralize military capacity, to craft a political architecture of dominance masked by federal forms, and to create a resource base capable of trans-regional warfare. His methods combined doctrinal military innovation, economic centralization, and pragmatic diplomacy, an integrated program that transformed Macedon from a contested periphery into the hegemonic center of Greek affairs. Philip's assassination in 336 BC transferred to his son, Alexander, not only the Macedonian throne, but also a military machine prepared for expansive action. Alexander's reign from 336 to 323 BC combined rapid operational tempo, tactical innovation, administrative experimentation, and a deliberate program of founding cities and settling veterans. He moved from consolidating the northern and Greek frontiers to executing a continuous campaign against the Persian Empire, using combined arms tactics that integrated the Macedonian phalanx, companion cavalry, light infantry, and engineering units. This segment traces Alexander's accession, principal campaigns from the Granicus River through India, his governing strategies in conquered territories, the logistics underpinning sustained campaigning, and the immediate political consequences of his death in 323 BC. Alexander assumed the kingship at about 20 years of age amid potential instability. He secured the loyalty of the Macedonian army and eliminated immediate rivals, punishing those who challenged the throne and sending a message to Greek cities that Macedonian authority would be enforced. He reaffirmed the League of Corinth while immediately moving to neutralize uprisings in Thrace and the north. These actions stabilized his rear and created the conditions for the Persian campaign that Philip had planned but not executed. Alexander inherited veterans trained under Philip's reforms and supplemented them with levies and allied contingents. The army that crossed into Asia in 334 BC was a composite force, a corps of professional Macedonian phalangites trained with the sarissa, companion cavalry as a decisive shock arm, archers and peltasts for skirmishing roles, allied Greek hoplites, and a nascent logistical tail of engineers and transport units. The first major engagement occurred at the Battle of the Granicus in 334 BC, where Alexander's forces confronted Persian satrapal armies along the riverine plain of northwest Asia Minor. Tactical initiative characterized the Macedonian approach. Alexander personally led cavalry charges that exploited gaps in Persian deployment while the phalanx secured the center and pushed forward. Victory at Granicus opened the Anatolian littoral to Macedonian control, enabled the capture of coastal cities, and encouraged Greek police of Asia Minor to defect from Persian rule. Alexander secured strategic ports such as Miletus and Halicarnassus through sieges and negotiated surrenders, thereby controlling sea lanes and consolidating lines of supply for subsequent operations. The campaign's next decisive confrontation was the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, where Alexander faced Darius III's main field army in southern Anatolia. The battlefield, constrained by mountains and the Panaris River, limited the Persian numerical advantages. Alexander's order of battle, phalanx holding the center, companions on the right, and coordinated use of light infantry, produced a breakthrough against the Persian left, while cavalry maneuvers disrupted Persian command cohesion. Darius fled the field, abandoning his baggage and family. The capture of royal treasure and the liberation of captive Persian families had a symbolic and material impact. Issus demonstrated Alexander's ability to combine bold personal command with disciplined coordination of arms in terrain that neutralized Persian cavalry superiority. Alexander's approach to conquered cities mixed military pressure with policies designed to win over local elites. He often spared civilian populations that surrendered promptly, re-established local constitutions when useful, and appointed satraps, sometimes retaining Persian administrators but under Macedonian oversight, when this secured continuity of revenue. When resistance occurred, his sieges could be relentless. Egypt's reception of Alexander in 332 BC differed from some mainland resistances. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. Alexander accepted homage at Memphis, visited the oracle at Siwa, and was proclaimed son of Ammonius. a politically significant ritual recognition that provided him with Egyptian legitimacy. In Egypt, he founded Alexandria, cited as founded in 331 BC, positioned to control grain exports and maritime traffic. Alexandria would later become a major administrative and cultural center. Alexander's activities in Egypt combined pragmatic statecraft, securing grain supplies and naval bases, with symbolic acts that fostered acceptance among local priesthoods. The decisive strategic rupture with the Persian imperial core occurred at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, often dated to October. Darius again marshaled a large field army and arrayed forces on an open plain favorable to cavalry maneuvers and to superior numbers. Alexander chose to fight on the ground of his choosing, using oblique advances to fix Persian forces while his companions and cavalry exploited gaps to strike at Darius' center. The meeting ended in a comprehensive Macedonian victory. Darius fled once more, and Alexander marched into Babylon, Susa, and subsequently Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid dynasty. In Persepolis, Alexander allowed his troops to loot the palace complex. The palace was set aflame in 330 BC, an act interpreted variously in antiquity. As a calculated political symbolism, an impulsive act during a victory feast, or an outcome of unrest among troops. Yet its material consequence was the destruction of Achaemenid royal archives and palatial riches. Darius' flight and eventual death in 330 BC, murdered by Bessus, a Bactrian satrap who proclaimed himself king, transformed the war into a pursuit not only of Persian military forces, but of the legitimacy once vested in the Achaemenid throne. Alexander pursued and captured Bessus, ordering his execution for regicide, and presented himself as avenger of imperial order while simultaneously assuming Persian royal trappings. He adopted elements of Persian court ceremonial, employing Persian dress at court, integrating Persian nobility into administrative roles, and appointing satraps drawn from both Macedonian and Persian elites. These policies had practical aims, stabilizing newly conquered territories by co-opting local structures, and ideological effects, as they repositioned Alexander as a ruler of a trans-regional empire rather than merely a Greek hegemon. The campaign's eastern phase extended beyond the Persian heartland. Alexander pushed into Central Asia to subdue resisting satraps and nomadic confederations, facing guerrilla-style opposition in mountainous terrains and harsh deserts, and conducting joint operations that required extended logistical lines. In 327 to 326 BC, he crossed into the Indian subcontinent, campaigning along the Indus River against regional rulers. The campaign culminated at the Battle of the Hydaspes, Jhelum River, in 326 BC, where Alexander confronted King Porus. Porus fielded war elephants and cavalry. Alexander adapted tactics, using feigned retreats, combined infantry-cavalry coordination, and audacious river crossings to achieve victory. Impressed by Porus's resistance and comportment, Alexander restored him to his kingship as a client ruler, expanding Macedonian influence into the Punjab while preserving local dynastic structures. Operational limits manifested as Alexander's army advanced. Sustained campaigning, casualties, and homesickness among veterans mounted. At the Hyphasis, Bias, river in 326 BC, Alexander's troops, exhausted and apprehensive about further campaigns into the Indian interior, mutinied and refused to march farther east. Alexander acceded to their insistence and began plans for a return. The homeward journey included a difficult overland march through the Gedrosian Desert, modern Makran, in 325 BC, a hazardous route where logistical failures and harsh climate inflicted substantial losses. Alexander's return also involved re-establishing control over satrapal appointments, resettling veterans, and organizing administrative structures that could sustain a trans-regional polity. Alexander's administrative policies blended centralizing impulses with pragmatic delegation. He maintained Macedonian military governors to secure garrison positions while appointing trusted Macedonians, such as Parmenion, Craterus, and Ptolemy, to oversee provinces. He also sought to integrate conquered elites through marriage alliances and court ceremonial. At the mass wedding at Susa in 324 BC, Alexander orchestrated mass marriages between Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen, an attempt to bind Macedonian and Persian elites through kinship and to encourage cultural synthesis. The policy produced uneven results. While some Macedonian officers embraced local alliances, others resented the perceived dilution of Macedonian identity and privilege. Administrative reorganization included efforts to standardize taxation, coinage, and the use of Greek as a language of administration in many cities, thereby facilitating long-distance communication and economic integration. City founding was foundational to Alexander's strategy of imperial consolidation. He established or refounded numerous cities, many bearing the name Alexandria, positioned to control trade routes, anchor garrisons, and serve as centers for veteran settlement. These foundations carried Greek civic institutions, mixed populations of settlers and locals, and often operated bilingually in administration. The spread of Hellenic urban models, agoras, theater, gymnasium, magistracies, produced durable cultural leylands that fostered Greek language and customs even after Macedonian political control waned. The cities became nodes in a commercial network that facilitated exchange from the Mediterranean to the industry. Alexander's rule also engaged with religious and ideological questions. He claimed divine favor and, in some contexts, divine lineage. Egyptian priesthoods proclaimed him son of Ammonius, and Persian courtiers recognized him with royal epithets. These religious gestures supported political legitimation across diverse populations. His patronage of scholars, cartographers, and natural philosophers accompanied campaigns. Alexander gathered specialists to record geography, flora, and fauna, and ethnographic observations, contributing to a practical imperial knowledge base that would inform later Hellenistic scholarship. Alexander died in 323 BC in Babylon while preparing for further eastern operations. The precise circumstances of his death remain debated in ancient sources. Fever, possible poisoning, or other causes are variously suggested, but the immediate political effect was incontrovertible. His sudden demise created a power vacuum with no clear adult successor. His half-brother Philip Aridius, mentally disabled, and his infant son Alexander IV were nominal heirs, but effective authority required a capable regent and experienced generals. The Macedonian commanders, Parmenion's son Philotas, already executed, Parmenion himself long eliminated, and surviving lieutenants such as Ptolemy, Craterus, Antipater, and Perdiccas faced the challenge of managing an empire that stretched from the Adriatic to the Industry. The immediate aftermath involved contested regencies, division of satrapies among leading commanders, and the first articulations of what would become the Wars of the Diadochi. The death of Alexander in 323 BC did not produce an orderly succession, but a sequence of interventions that transformed his unified command into a set of competing monarchies. Within a decade, generals who had commanded Macedonian forces assumed territorial control. Ptolemy in Egypt, Seleucus in much of Asia, Antigonus Monophthalmus, and his son Demetrius in parts of Anatolia, in Syria Lysimachus in Thrace, in Western Asia Minor, and Cassander in Macedon and Greece. The immediate years after Alexander, marked by the Wars of the Diadochi, were characterized by shifting coalitions, battlefield realignments, and repeated partitions. By the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BC, the disorder yielded to stabilized kingdoms whose structures combined Macedonian military institutions with administrative practices adapted to diverse provincial contexts. These states, principally the Ptolemaic, Seleucid, and Antigonid realms, dominated the Hellenistic political landscape up to and beyond 200 BC. The first decisive phase of the successor conflicts ended with the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, where a coalition of rivals defeated Antigonus, eliminating him as a unifying force and creating enduring territorial divisions. The settlement of Ipsus distributed former Macedonian imperial lands among victors and established political equilibria that lasted for decades. Ptolemy consolidated control over Egypt and parts of the Levant. Seleucus secured large swathes of the former Persian heartland and the eastern provinces. Lysimachus took Thrace and western Anatolia for a time. Cassander maintained Macedon and parts of Greece. These new polities presented themselves as dynastic monarchies, ruling houses that fused Macedonian royal ideology with local legitimizing strategies targeted at subject populations. Administrative forms evolved rapidly and pragmatically. Monarchs inherited or adapted satrapal structures from the Achaemenid past and combined them with Macedonian military governorships. Provincial governance relied on appointed officials, satraps or strategoi, charged with tax collection, troop levies, and judicial oversight. The monarch's court became the center of fiscal and political authority. Palace treasuries, royal chanceries, and dedicated bureaucracies marshaled tribute, organized public building, and administered coinage. These states depended on regular revenue flows, land taxes, harbor dues, customs, and mining income to pay standing armies, fund naval fleets, and sponsor court extravagance. Fiscal centralization enabled larger and more sustained military operations than had been typical for individual city-states. Urban foundations became the principal instrument of political control and cultural diffusion. Alexander's policy of establishing cities continued under his successors, but the emphasis shifted from rapid conquest to durable settlement. Rulers founded new polis, often named Alexandria or after dynastic members, and refounded destroyed or depopulated towns to serve as administrative centers, military garrison towns, and hubs of commerce. The Ptolemies, for example, developed a coastal network centered on Alexandria that regulated grain exports and maritime trade in the eastern Mediterranean. Seleucid policy favored a dense grid of cities across Anatolia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Iranian plateau, designed to project Hellenic institutions and to integrate local economies into imperial circuits. The urban project served multiple ends: settling veterans, guaranteeing supply lines, standardizing administrative practice, and spreading Greek language and institutions. Language and communication adapted to imperial needs. Koine Greek, a simplified and widely intelligible form of Attic Greek, became the lingua franca of administration, commerce, and intellectual exchange across the Hellenistic world. It facilitated interaction among Greek settlers, local elites, and provincial administrators. Bilingual inscriptions and papyri attest to the coexistence of Greek with local languages, Egyptian, Aramaic dialects, and indigenous tongues, creating multilingual administrative environments. Postal routes, ship convoys, and regularized coinage helped to integrate distant provinces economically and politically. Royal ideology and cultic practice changed the relationship between ruler and ruled. Hellenistic monarchs cultivated personal followings and public images through dynastic propaganda. Coin portraits, royal titulature linking kings to divine favor, and foundation mythologies that connected new regimes to Alexander's legacy. The Ptolemies in Egypt openly adopted pharaonic ceremonial to appeal to native priesthoods, while simultaneously sponsoring Greek-style royal cults that presented kings as benefactors and intermediaries. The Seleucids maintained a more syncretic approach in the East, balancing Greek civic institutions with local satrapal prerogatives and fostering royal patronage of cities. Ruler cults, local cultic honors accorded to living monarchs and to deceased founders, operated across courts and cities as instruments of loyalty and as formal mechanisms for redistributing honor and privilege. Economic structures deepened and widened in scale. Long-distance trade expanded along maritime and overland routes connecting the Mediterranean with the Black Sea, the Levant, Mesopotamia, and the Indian Ocean littoral. Grain from Egypt and the Levant, timber from Anatolia, metals from Macedon and Thrace, and luxury goods from the East moved through Hellenistic markets. Coinage proliferated. Local mints produced silver and bronze denominations that standardized transactions and facilitated fiscal accounting. The monetization of taxation and troop pay transformed local economies. Markets for mercenary labor, shipbuilding, and urban construction created sustained demand for artisans and merchants. Commercial intermediaries, often local elites, Jewish communities, and Greek mercantile networks, linked provincial agrarian production to metropolitan demand. Military organization retained the Macedonian phalanx as a core element but adapted considerably. Hellenistic armies combined large phalanx blocks with sampled heavy cavalry, light infantry, and more diverse mercenary contingents recruited from local populations and from abroad. The employment of war elephants, imported from India or raised locally in Seleucid domains, added an element of shock warfare that changed battlefield calculations. Siegecraft advanced. Engineers and siege-train logistics facilitated the capture of heavily fortified cities and the projection of force across large areas. Naval power remained vital for Ptolemaic control of the eastern Mediterranean and for Seleucid efforts to secure coastal territories. Control of harbors and mastery of naval logistics determined the capacity of kingdoms to defend supply lines and to conduct amphibious operations. Religion and cultural exchange produced hybrid practices rather than simple Hellenization. Greek myths and civic cults were transplanted into new urban contexts, but they coexisted with local religious traditions. Temples to Greek gods were built alongside shrines to local deities. Civic calendars incorporated local festivals, and priesthoods were recruited from new social strata. In Egypt, The Ptolemies made deliberate accommodations to Egyptian priestly institutions, which sustained social order and legitimized the dynasty. In Asia, Seleucid policy sometimes integrated Zoroastrian and local cultic norms into administrative rituals. The result was a plural religious landscape in which Hellenic forms provided a shared vocabulary, while local identities endured and adapted. Intellectual life flourished under royal patronage. Alexandria became the most visible center. The Mycenaean and its associated library cultivated scholarship in philology, geometry, astronomy, and medicine. Figures associated with Hellenistic learning: Euclid, active c. 300 BC, Eratosthenes, c. 276 to 194 BC, and later Archimedes, worked within institutions supported by royal and civic funds. Mathematics, geography, and natural history advanced through systematic observation, compilation, and critical debate. Historiography and philology also professionalized. Scholars collected manuscripts, established critical editions, and engaged in textual criticism. The spread of Koine Greek and the founding of libraries facilitated the dissemination of knowledge across imperial networks. Philosophy diversified and institutionalized. Schools such as Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, and Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, developed ethical systems that responded to the altered political environment of monarchy and urban anonymity. The Peripatetic school, following Aristotle through successors such as Theophrastus, sustained empirical inquiry and botanical studies. Philosophers and rhetoricians operated in urban settings that supported public lectures, private schools, and patronage networks linking intellectuals to courts and cities. Artistic expression shifted in tone and scale. Sculpture and painting moved beyond idealized youth to explore individual pathos, dramatic movement, and emotional realism, the so-called Hellenistic Baroque. Works such as The Dying Gaul, dated to the late 4th or early 3rd century BC, manifest empathetic portrayal of defeated foes, expressive detail, and politically charged commemoration. Monumental architecture continued. Temples, gymnasia, theaters, and grand public stoas embodied civic pride and royal patronage. Public monuments and funerary sculpture became vehicles for personal and dynastic commemoration. Urban citizenship and civic institutions persisted, but within constrained political frameworks. Many Hellenistic cities retained local councils, magistracies, and assemblies. Municipal law continued to regulate daily life. However, ultimate sovereignty rested with monarchs who could override civic decisions, install garrisons, or grant privileged status to certain polis. Federal leagues and city confederations, such as the Aetolian and Achaean leagues, offered alternative forms of interstate organization that sometimes resisted monarchic encroachment. These federations combined military cooperation, common coinage, and federal magistracies, exercising considerable regional influence and providing models of collective action distinct from royal rule. Social stratification widened. Royal courts and urban elites accumulated wealth through land grants, tax farms, and monopolies on lucrative trade. Large-scale estates, sometimes managed by absentee landlords or royal appointees, expanded, and enslaved labor remained an important productive factor in agriculture and domestic service. At the same time, urban artisans, merchants, and professional soldiers comprised a growing middle zone whose economic roles could be politically consequential. Jewish, Phoenician, and native communities navigated integration and autonomy within Hellenistic polities, with varying degrees of accommodation and resistance. Diplomacy and interstate wars defined political life through the 3rd century BC. The Syrian Wars, a series of conflicts between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms, illustrate how control of coastal Levantine territories and naval bases became recurrent causes of war. Macedon under the Antigonids remained a recurring factor in mainland Greek affairs, straddling alliance and rivalry with leagues and local powers. Rome's expansion in Italy and its naval wars with Carthage in the 3rd century began to create an external axis of power whose later interactions with Hellenistic states would become decisive. By 200 BC, Rome's role in Mediterranean diplomacy was increasing, even if direct Roman intervention in the Hellenistic East would intensify later. Economic integration, cultural exchange, and political competition produced a world markedly different from the city-state landscape of earlier centuries. Kingships centralized military and fiscal power. City foundations and imperial administration spread the Greek language and institutional forms across vast territories. Local traditions adapted to imperial structures. At the same time, persistent regional specificities, Egyptian temple economies, Mesopotamian bureaucracies, Anatolian city networks, tempered a uniform Hellenization. The Hellenistic era to 200 BC constituted a complex, interconnected system in which monarchy, urbanism, scholarship, and commerce combined to create durable patterns of governance, culture, and economy across a territory stretching from the Adriatic to the Industry. The period from 200 to 146 BC records the decisive disintegration of Hellenistic political independence in mainland Greece and the formal extension of Roman power into the Greek world. This transformation unfolded through a sequence of wars, diplomatic maneuvers, and institutional impositions in which Rome exploited existing rivalries, war weariness, and fiscal constraints among Greek states and Hellenistic monarchies. The result was not a single instantaneous annexation, but a series of military verdicts and settlements that ended autonomous interstate power in Greece, subordinated Macedon to Roman provincial rule, dissolved major federal leagues, and left Greek cities under Roman oversight, while preserving much of Greek cultural life. The process accelerates with Rome's growing involvement in Eastern Mediterranean politics following the Second Punic War. Rome's first direct military interventions in Greece occurred in the context of the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC. Philip V of Macedon, having sought to expand his influence in the Aegean and in the Greek mainland, and having allied with Hannibal during the Second Punic War, alarmed a coalition of Greek states that included Rhodes and Pergamon. They appealed to Rome for adjudication and assistance. Rome accepted, projecting military power into Greece. The decisive confrontation came at Cynocephaly in 197 BC, where a Roman army under Titus Quinctius Flamininus engaged the Macedonian phalanx. The Roman manipular legion's flexibility, combined with tactical exploitation of terrain, fractured the phalanx's cohesion and produced a clear Roman victory. The outcome dismantled Macedonian capacity to dominate Greece and established a new strategic relationship in which Rome positioned itself as arbiter. Flamininus followed victory with a political and rhetorical strategy that framed Roman intervention as liberation rather than annexation. In 196 BC, at the Isthmian Games, Flamininus proclaimed the freedom of the Greeks, dissolving major leagues and promising autonomy to polis freed from Macedonian control. The proclamation was a tactical move. It legitimized Rome's role as regional guarantor while discouraging immediate resistance. In practice, however, the settlement constrained Greek independence. Macedon accepted restrictions, loss of territory, limitations on its fleet and army, and indemnities, and Rome maintained a permanent strategic interest in the balance of power. Persia's eastern dynamics and the Seleucid challenge remained separate theaters, but Rome's role as a decisive power broker in Greece had been established. The Roman-Seleucid War, 192 to 188 BC, and the later Battle of Magnesia, 190 BC, further extended Rome's influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome's victory over Antiochus III checked Seleucid ambitions in Asia Minor, and the subsequent settlement left many Greek cities in Asia Minor within a Roman-influenced order. The redistribution of influence after these wars reshaped Greek geopolitics. Client kings, such as those of Pergamon, grew in importance as intermediaries aligned with Rome. Pergamon's rulers, particularly Eumenes II, leveraged Roman favor to extend local authority and to suppress rivals, thereby increasing Rome's indirect control through local allies. The second critical phase concerns Macedon itself. Philip V's successor Perseus attempted to restore Macedonian prestige and reconstitute regional alliances. His policies alarmed neighboring states and Rome. The Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC, culminated at Pydna in 168 BC, where Roman legions under Lucius Aemilius Paulus defeated Perseus decisively. The strategic consequences were severe. Macedon ceased to function as an independent Hellenistic monarchy. Rome dismantled the Argead monarchy's political structures, executed or enslaved many captives, and reorganized Macedon administratively. In 167 BC, the Roman Senate divided Macedonia into 4 client republics, each with restricted autonomy and subject to Roman oversight, fiscal control, and garrisoning as necessary. This division ended Macedonian hegemony and prevented the immediate reconstitution of a unified northern power. Across the same decades, developments in Western Asia Minor and the Hellenistic East further eroded independent power centers that might have sustained Greek autonomy. The Kingdom of Pergamon, a Roman ally, increased in prominence. Its last Attalid king, Attalus III, bequeathed his realm to Rome at his death in 133 BC. That bequest facilitated the creation of the Roman province of Asia shortly thereafter, reinforcing Roman administrative and fiscal presence in the Aegean trade networks that sustained many Greek cities. The absorption of Pergamon and the formalization of Asia's provincial system illustrate how Rome converted diplomatic patronage into territorial administration, integrating Greek economic centers into the Roman provincial framework. The internal politics of mainland Greece also consolidated Roman influence. Federal leagues that had provided mechanisms for collective action were weakened or dissolved. The Achaean League, a confederation of city-states in the Peloponnese and central Greece that had been a significant force since the Hellenistic period, increasingly clashed with Roman interests. The League's expansionist tendencies and conflicts with neighboring cities created a pretext for Roman intervention. In 146 BC, the confrontation reached its military and symbolic peak. The Achaean League resisted Roman arbitration and sought to assert autonomy. Rome responded with force. The decisive Roman general in Greece at that time, Lucius Mummius Achaicus, moved against the Achaean center. After defeating the Achaean forces, Roman troops entered Corinth in 146 BC. The city was sacked and destroyed. Its male population was slaughtered or sold into slavery, and its art and wealth were carried to Rome. The fall of Corinth had immediate political effects. It eliminated the Achaean League's institutional center and signaled the effective end of organized Greek resistance to Rome. The Roman action in 146 BC produced two administrative consequences that reshaped Greek politics. First, Macedonia was formally annexed as a Roman province in 146 BC, ending the short-lived client republic system and placing the territory under direct Roman provincial administration with governors appointed by Rome. Second, although southern Greece was not immediately converted into a formal province, in the same year Roman military and fiscal authority penetrated the Peloponnese and Attica. Major federations were dissolved, garrisons were stationed where deemed necessary, and local constitutions were reshaped to accommodate Roman oversight. Over the subsequent decades, the Roman provincial apparatus expanded. In the late Republic and early Empire, the province of Achaia, covering much of southern Greece, would be organized under more consistent Roman administrative structures, consolidating earlier settlements into a formal provincial order. Economically, the Roman conquest reconfigured Greek production and trade. The pillage of Corinth and the influx of Greek art into Rome signaled both the depletion of a major commercial hub and the integration of Greek material culture into Roman elite consumption. Roman taxation and provincial requisitions altered local fiscal burdens. Cities that had previously paid tribute to Hellenistic kings or federations now faced Roman levies, land assessments, and the economic distortions that accompany imperial extraction. Some cities benefited from new trade links with Rome and the integration into Roman markets. Others suffered from the loss of regional autonomy and the disruption of traditional patronage networks. Culturally and intellectually, the Roman ascendancy did not erase Greek influence. Rather, it reconfigured it. Rome's elites had long admired Greek literature, philosophy, and art. The absorption of Greek cities supplied Rome with teachers, sculptors, rhetorical models, and texts. Greek intellectuals migrated to Rome as tutors and advisors. Roman elites learned the Greek language and rhetoric to a degree that made Greek education a formative element of Roman elite culture. In political terms, this cultural prestige translated into a Rome that increasingly appropriated Greek institutional forms. Rhetorical education for Roman statesmen, the study of Greek law and philosophy, and patronage of Greek artists became central to Roman elite identity. The cultural transfer was asymmetric. Rome imposed political control while absorbing and idealizing Hellenic culture, but it guaranteed that Greek intellectual life continued, now reframed within Roman patronage networks. Socially, the Roman imposition produced displacement and reorganization. War captives from Corinth and elsewhere were sold as slaves into Roman and provincial markets, increasing the availability of slave labor across the Mediterranean. The redistribution of land as veteran allotments or as fiscal property altered local agrarian structures. Local elites adapted in multiple ways. Some collaborated with Roman officials to secure positions as municipal magistrates under Roman supervision. Others resisted and were marginalized. Urban life continued in many Greek cities, often with reduced political autonomy, but with surviving municipal institutions that regulated daily commerce, cultic calendars, and local law within Roman constraints. Diplomacy and military presence remained instruments of control. Rome maintained strategic garrisons, could summon federal gatherings under its aegis, and used client kings and ally polities as buffers. The political map that emerged after 146 BC was a mosaic. Formally annexed provinces, Macedonia and later Achaea, in a more organized form. Client kingdoms, such as those that had previously been part of the Pergamene or Seleucid spheres, and autonomous polis that survived under Rome's protective umbrella, but without the capacity for independent grand strategy. The real measure of autonomy became local municipal administration rather than interstate sovereignty. The final phase of Greek political independence thus closed with the sack of Corinth in 146 BC and the provincialization of Macedonia the same year. Those actions extinguished the principal institutional forms. Unified Hellenistic monarchies capable of projecting power into Greece and federations capable of regional resistance that might have preserved Greek political autonomy. Yet the political eclipse did not mean cultural extinction. Greek language, law, philosophy, and art continued to shape Mediterranean elites. Greek cities remained centers of learning, and the Hellenic intellectual legacy became embedded within Roman institutions. The military and fiscal consequences of Roman conquest remade the material conditions of Greek life, while cultural continuity ensured that Greek civilization, though politically subordinated, remained central to the Mediterranean world of the Republic and, later, the Empire. The incorporation of Greece into the Roman state after 146 BC set in motion a prolonged process of administrative integration, economic reorientation, and cultural redefinition that lasted through the Principate and into late antiquity. Roman rule did not erase civic life. It reframed political authority, redirected fiscal flows, and placed Greek cities within imperial networks of administration, military logistics, and commerce. Over the next 4 centuries, the Greek peninsula and the Hellenic East became both a resource base for Rome and a continuing center of education, intellectual life, and urban culture. This segment follows the administrative arrangements, economic patterns, social change, cultural continuities, and religious transformations that characterized Roman Greece up to AD 330. Administrative incorporation proceeded through provincial institutions and local municipal law. After the defeat of Macedon and the sack of Corinth in 146 BC, Rome divided Macedon into administrative districts that were later unified as the Roman province of Macedonia. Southern Greece and the Peloponnese remained in a dependent but more varied condition for decades. By the early imperial period, under Augustus and his successors, the Roman Senate and imperial administration regularized provincial governance. Cities held statuses as coloniae or municipia, with coloniae often populated by Roman veterans, and endowed with privileges of Roman law. Municipia retained elements of local self-government while operating under Roman oversight. Governors, senatorial proconsuls, or imperial legates, depending on the period and the province, administered justice, collected taxes, and commanded garrisons. Municipal councils, bull, magistrates, and local elites, decurions, continued to run day-to-day civic affairs, but ultimate sovereignty rested with Rome. This layered sovereignty allowed municipal law codes and local customs to survive while aligning fiscal and military obligations to imperial priorities. Fiscal integration reshaped production and public finance. Rome required regular taxes and requisitions to sustain its armies and urban clientele. Provincials paid land and poll taxes, port duties, and special levies imposed during emergencies. At the same time, Roman administration invested in infrastructure that benefited commerce and fiscal extraction alike. Roads, harbors, and public buildings were repaired or newly constructed to speed troop movement and to facilitate tax collection. The Via Egnatia, the Roman road crossing the north of Greece from the Adriatic to the Thracian-Bithynian frontier, became a strategic artery for military logistics and commercial traffic. Harbors such as Thessalonica, Patras, Piraeus, and Corinth regained importance as nodes in Mediterranean shipping networks, handling grain, timber, oil, and manufactured goods. Local elites frequently underwrote public works through euergetism, paid benefactions that financed baths, stoas, theaters, and temples, both to secure honor and to stimulate local economies. Economic patterns shifted toward greater integration with Roman markets. Greece supplied raw materials and agricultural produce. Olives and olive oil, wine, pastoral products, timber, and some metals moved into Roman commercial circuits. Egypt, rather than Greece, became the empire's principal granary, but Greek ports played essential intermediary roles in distribution. Manufacturing and artisanal production persisted in urban centers. Pottery workshops, metalworking, textile production, and shipbuilding continued to employ local populations. Coinage became standardized, and the Roman monetary system permeated local markets, simplifying long-distance trade and enabling taxation in coin rather than in kind. Urban prosperity was uneven. Some cities, particularly those granted colonia status or favored by imperial patrons, saw renewed urban investment and population growth. Others suffered decline as trade patterns shifted or as the costs of imperial taxation and competition reduced margins. Military presence and strategic positioning shaped political life. Macedonia and parts of northern Greece hosted Roman legions or were maintained as staging grounds for eastern campaigns. The stability of the Aegean depended on Roman naval capacity and on alliances with local naval powers earlier in the period. Defensive infrastructure, forts, watch stations, and garrisons protected sea lines and mountain passes. The military presence also had local economic effects. Legions required supplies and contractors, creating markets for provisioning and stimulating artisanal production in garrison towns. Conversely, the movement of veterans and the establishment of coloniae could alter landholding patterns, introducing Roman-style land divisions and new property claims that affected local agrarian relations. Civic culture adapted to Roman realities without abandoning Greek educational, rhetorical, and philosophical traditions. Greek paideia, training in language, literature, rhetoric, and philosophy, retained prestige and became a staple of elite education throughout the empire. Wealthy Romans sent sons to Athens and other Greek centers for philosophical instruction and rhetorical training. Greek tutors, sophists, and rhetoricians became fixtures in Roman households. Athens remained a magnet for philosophical study. The academy and the lyceum continued as institutional expressions of Platonic and peripatetic learning, while local schools of rhetoric attracted students from across the Mediterranean. The persistence of Greek language literature and the emergence of Koine Greek as a common administrative and commercial tongue ensured that Greek intellectual output reached a broad audience. Royal and imperial patronage. Hadrian's known Philhellenism is a prime example. Enhanced civic pride and stimulated building programs. Imperial patronage reshaped urban topography. Emperor Hadrian, reigned AD 117 to 138, stands out for a series of architectural and civic interventions in Greece. He completed long unfinished temple projects, endowed libraries, and initiated constructions that mingled Roman urbanism with classical Hellenic forms. The Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, whose construction had begun in the Hellenistic period, was completed under Hadrian's sponsorship. Hadrian's benefactions reinforced the appearance of continuity with classical heritage while embedding imperial presence in the urban fabric. Many cities accepted imperial honorifics and cultic commemorations in exchange for public works and financial grants. Religious life in Roman Greece was plural and evolving. Traditional Hellenic cults and pan-Hellenic festivals persisted and often flourished under Roman rule. Local priesthoods retained social authority and controlled temple resources. The imperial cult, ceremonial recognition and worship of the emperor or his genius, served as a public ritual tying cities to Rome. Participation in imperial cultic acts signaled loyalty and secured favor. Meanwhile, new religious currents entered the region. Eastern mystery cults, syncretic deities blending Greek and Eastern elements, and philosophical religiosity widened the religious landscape. Christianity appeared in this same milieu. Missionary journeys recorded in early Christian sources place Paul in Greek cities: Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and Corinth. In the mid-1st century AD, where nascent Christian communities formed among Jews and Gentiles. Christianity initially remained a minority religion, but gradually established organizational structures that would engage with Roman authorities and local elites. Legal status and social mobility reflected imperial policy and local negotiation. The extension of Roman citizenship, progressively through the early empire and decisively with the Constitutio Antoniniana, AD 212, which conferred citizenship upon the free inhabitants of the empire, changed legal relations. Citizens could hold legal rights under Roman law, appear in Roman courts, and serve in certain official roles. Before AD 212, municipal elites often held Latin rights or were given citizenship grants as honors. Such legal instruments tied local leadership to imperial structures. The grant of citizenship redistributed legal privileges and fiscal responsibilities, while cultural assimilation continued through language, intermarriage, and service in imperial administration. Social stratification and local politics remained complex. Wealthy landowners, shipping magnates, and local magistrates dominated municipal councils, but urban populations included artisans, smallholders, sailors, and enslaved laborers. Greek cities continued to elect magistrates and to maintain civic festivals and collegia. These institutions provided social cohesion and local governance. Euergetism, public benefaction by elites, continued as a primary mechanism of urban investment and civic prestige. Patronage networks extended from municipal elites to the imperial court. Successful local benefactors could secure imperial benefactions in return, while imperial benefactions sustained local monuments and festivals. Christianity's rise and the increasing involvement of emperors in religious affairs introduced new fault lines by the late 3rd and early 4th centuries. Persecutions under select emperors intermittently afflicted Christian communities. The motives combined legal suspicion of secret societies, refusal to perform imperial cult acts, and periodic scapegoating during crises. The Edict of Milan, AD 313, issued by Constantine and Licinius, granted religious toleration to Christians and returned confiscated property. Subsequent imperial policy under Constantine favored Christianity materially and symbolically. Imperial patronage funded churches, Christian clerics received legal privileges, and hierarchies of bishops assumed civic responsibilities in charity and dispute resolution. Constantine's policies did not obliterate pagan traditions immediately, but reconfigured public cultic space and imperial ideology. By AD 325, the Council of Nicaea, called by Constantine, addressed theological disputes and produced a formula for ecclesiastical unity, marking an organizational turning point for Christian institutions across the empire. Greek cities hosted Christian communities that now participated in imperial and provincial structures in ways previously reserved for civic patrons and pagan priesthoods. Bishops increasingly exercised public roles in urban governance alongside municipal elites, mediating between local populations and imperial authorities. The transformation culminated politically with Constantine's foundation of Constantinople in AD 330, an event that relocated imperial attention from Rome to the eastern Mediterranean. Constantinople's elevation repositioned the center of gravity of imperial administration closer to the Greek-speaking East and to the Mediterranean trade networks that passed through it. The new capital's foundation reshaped imperial logistics, diplomacy, and cultural patronage. Eastern provinces, including Greek cities, now found themselves within a reoriented imperial framework that privileged Eastern routes and institutions. Through these centuries, Greek civic institutions adapted to imperial supervision while continuing to supply cultural leadership to Rome and the wider Mediterranean. The municipal life of polis, festivals, schools, courts, and local magistracies persevered in altered form. Economically, Greece was integrated into Roman markets and military logistics. Administratively, it became part of provincial hierarchies. Culturally, it sustained educational and intellectual traditions that transformed Roman elites. Religiously, the landscape moved from polytheistic pluralism to a growing ecclesiastical presence that would, by the mid-4th century, be decisively shaped by imperial favor. The consequence was a Hellenic world that no longer governed itself autonomously, but remained central to the empire's cultural and intellectual identity. The Roman imperial center's eastward turn at Constantine's founding of Constantinople in AD 330 set the political trajectory for the eastern Mediterranean across the next 3 centuries. The city's establishment did more than relocate the imperial capital. It institutionalized a durable Eastern Roman polity whose administrative practices, military priorities, religious alignments, and cultural idioms increasingly diverged from those of the Latin West. From the 4th century into the early 7th, the Greek-speaking Eastern provinces underwent administrative consolidation, a redefinition of church-state relations, periodic reconquests and losses, and social transformations that together constitute the Byzantine transition. This segment traces those measurable changes between AD 330 and 600 with attention to institutional structures, military and fiscal pressures, religious developments, urban life, and the processes that preserved classical learning even as the political order changed. Constantine's political reconfiguration reorganized imperial governance. He enhanced the office of the emperor as an instrument of both secular and religious authority, and he restructured provincial administration by strengthening the Praetorian prefecture system that coordinated civil governance, tax collection, and supply. The empire's eastern prefecture, eventually the Praetorian prefecture of the East, became the core administrative layer for Anatolia, the Levant, Egypt, and the southern Balkans. Diocesan divisions and provincial reorganizations multiplied bureaucratic tiers, increasing administrative reach into localities while aiming to rationalize taxation and judicial oversight. The resulting governance complex was more heavily bureaucratic than the early Roman municipal model. Imperial secretariats, palace chancelleries, and provincial staffs professionalized record-keeping and fiscal accounting. Fiscal and military needs shaped policy. The Eastern Empire maintained large standing armies and frontier forces. Limitanii on frontiers and comitatenses as mobile field troops, paid from a tax base that combined land taxes, poll taxes, customs, and grain requisitions in some districts. Military expenditure rose in the face of persistent external threats. Raids and incursions by Gothic groups in the Balkans, wars with the Sassanid Persian Empire across the eastern frontier, and the need to garrison key coastal harbors and mountain passes. The imperial budget funded not only campaigns, but also large-scale building and logistics. Constantinople's defenses were continually expanded, and the later Theodosian walls consolidated the capital's security in the 5th century. The fiscal pressure required more precise revenue extraction, and at the local level, landholders, landlords, and ecclesiastical institutions increasingly filled gaps in provisioning and public works. Theodosius I's settlement, late 4th century, and subsequent developments entrenched Christianity's centrality to imperial identity. Emperors assumed an active role in ecclesiastical affairs, calling councils, enforcing doctrinal decisions, and granting legal privileges to clergy. The relationship between imperial power and church authority became institutionalized. Bishops in major cities exercised both spiritual and civic influence. Episcopal sees such as Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch carried weight in regional politics. Councils convened in this period dealt with doctrinal controversies that had immediate political effects. The Council of Constantinople, AD 381, revised Nicene formulations. The Council of Ephesus, AD 431, and the Council of Chalcedon, AD 451, attempted to settle Christological disputes. These conciliar decisions provoked deep regional consequences. Chalcedon's Diophysite definition of Christ alienated many Monophysite communities in Egypt and Syria, producing ecclesiastical schisms that weakened imperial cohesion in important provinces. Imperial policy toward the church and doctrine had administrative as well as theological aims. By law and by custom, the emperor emerged as arbiter of orthodoxy, a role that combined patronage and coercion. The legal corpus increasingly accommodated ecclesiastical privileges, tax exemptions for churches, recognition of bishopric property, and juridical responsibilities for clerics, while secular courts continued to adjudicate criminal and fiscal cases. This intertwining of law and religion elevated the church as a major landed and social actor. Monastic institutions proliferated in rural Egypt, Palestine, and Cappadocia. Their scriptoria and libraries became repositories of texts and centers of learning, even as they shaped local economies through landholding and charitable activities. The 5th and 6th centuries were marked by sustained military engagements and episodic reconquests that reshaped territorial control. In the West, the collapse of Roman authority produced successor kingdoms: Visigothic Spain, Ostrogothic Italy, and Vandal North Africa, that altered strategic balances and commerce. Justinian I.'s reign, 527 to 565, represents the most explicit imperial attempt to restore Roman authority across lost Western provinces. Justinian commissioned generalships against the Vandals in North Africa, 533 to 534, and fought the protracted Gothic War in Italy, 535 to 554, under generals such as Belisarius and Narses. These operations recovered large cities and provincial revenues temporarily, but they drained imperial treasuries and exposed logistical limits. The reconquest of North Africa restored grain flows to the empire, while military operations in Italy devastated urban infrastructures and destabilized long-term economic recovery there. Concurrently, the eastern frontier confronted renewed Persian pressure. The Roman-Persian frontier remained the empire's most consequential external contest. Campaigns and counter-campaigns in Mesopotamia and Armenia isolated resources and required continuous troop deployments. Victories and settlements under Justinian's generals temporarily altered borders, but neither side achieved a lasting strategic advantage. The allocation of manpower and treasure to Western reconquest and Eastern defense created a persistent fiscal tension that influenced policy and limited sustainable imperial expansion. The social and demographic effects of war and disease were stark. The plague of Justinian, emerging in 541 to 542 and recurring in waves, reduced populations across the eastern Mediterranean, with acute mortality recorded in port cities and urban centers. Contemporary accounts and later demographic reconstructions indicate large-scale depopulation in some districts, labor shortages that raised wages locally, and tax shortfalls that complicated revenue collection.